Chapter 561. At this time, Li Guanwen was already drenched in cold sweat. As for what Ji Ziyu's intentions were, he was very clear in his heart. Li Guanwen was your majesty's favorite. When he was in the imperial court, even the cabinet elders had to be courteous to him. Sometimes, Li Guanwen represented your majesty. For example, this time, he was representing your majesty to question Ji Ziyu. This situation was well known to the world. Even these uncouth men in the Tiger Army knew that your majesty's chief of eunuchs could not be offended. However, Ji Ziyu's one sentence was enough for these men in the Tiger Army to arrest him without any hesitation. Li Guanwen had no doubt that if Ji Ziyu had casually said, "Execute him on the spot," his head would have been separated from his neck. The Tiger Army's obedience to Ji Ziyu was to the extent that they did not care about your majesty. They did not even care if the imperial censor accused them of treason. They only listened to Ji Ziyu's commands wholeheartedly. Didn't this show the extent of Ji Ziyu's control over the Tiger Army? Ji Ziyu used such a direct method to answer Li Guanwen's question. Some things were seen with one's own eyes. If Ji Ziyu said that he had complete control over the Tiger Army, perhaps others would not believe it. However, Li Guanwen had no choice but to believe it now. Li Guanwen wiped the sweat on his forehead, staggered up in embarrassment, and said with a smile, "Prince Consort Ji is indeed a heroic figure. In such a short time, you have already taken care of the Tiger Army so well that it is as impenetrable as an iron bucket. Your Majesty would be very happy if he knew." Ji Ziyu nodded coldly. "Is there anything else?" Li Guanwen choked for a moment. He knew that Prince Consort Ji had always treated people coldly. However, he had just mentioned your Majesty. Shouldn't a normal person be modest, make small talk, and then thank your Majesty for her trust and cultivation? Why did Prince Consort Ji seem like he wanted to chase him away? Replying to the Prince Consort, "This servant has nothing else. Don't worry, I won't say anything that shouldn't be said in reply to your Majesty. As long as your Majesty knows that you have taken control of the Tiger Army, he will definitely praise you." The smile on Li Guanwen's face squeezed out two deep crow's feet from the corners of his eyes. Ji Ziyu remained expressionless. He nodded emotionlessly and said, "I won't see you out." Li Guanwen hurriedly saluted and walked out. Outside the tent, Li Guanwen breathed in the free air outside. Only then did he feel like he had finally come back to life. Ji Ziyu was indeed someone who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He had killed countless people. The icy aura around him was too frightening. Anyone who was stared at by him would feel like their necks would be broken in the blink of an eye. Li Guanwen felt like he would have nightmares for more than 10 days if he had experienced something like today. Fortunately, he had received good news. Your Majesty would be very happy if he knew that Prince Consort Ji had taken control of the Tiger Army and did not have to worry about the Tiger Army turning against Prince Zhongshu in midway. Li Guanwen quickly left to report back. In the tent, Ji Ziyu once again returned to the map. His slender, strong, and well-defined fingers slid from the Tianyu Pass to the Tianlang Pass, then through Tianshu Pass and Tianmen Pass. They passed by countless towns and cities as they gradually made their way to the capital. Pang Shao was coming back. He had already found Qin Yining. However, your Majesty had already prepared a large net and was just waiting for them to crawl into it. For Pang Zhao's sake, your Majesty even trusted him with the Tiger Army. Ji Ziyu thought that your Majesty must have made up his mind to get rid of Pang Zhao this time. Ji Ziyu narrowed his eyes and pointed at a certain spot on the map. After a long time, Ji Ziyu finally came back to his senses. He sighed softly and thought to himself, it would have been better if he didn't come back this time. Why did he bring his wife back in such a hurry? Pang Shao and Qin Yining naturally could not hear Ji Ziyu's thoughts. However, their pace of returning to the capital was indeed slowed down because of Qin Yining's severe morning sickness. Sister Yi, are you feeling better? Pang Xiao fed Qin Yining a dried sour plum and coaxed her. I heard that this can relieve nausea. Try it. At this time, they were lying together in the soft and comfortable carriage. In order to reduce the nausea caused by the bumps, Pang Xiao specially ordered people to wrap the wheels with thick cotton. As a result, the shaking was indeed much less, and the disturbing sound of the wheels was also much weaker. However, the slowing of the journey was unavoidable. Now, whenever Yi Binggu saw Pang Xiao's carriage, he would be so angry that his liver would hurt. I'm fine. I'm already feeling better. Qin Yining frowned and leaned into Pang Xiao's arms. The tears from the vomiting were still hanging from the corners of her eyes. She closed her eyes and weakly handed her entire weight to Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao looked down at her pale face with pity. He wiped the corners of her eyes with his sleeve and said, "We're about to reach the capital. With your body like this, I'm really worried. When we get back, we'll ask the imperial physician to take a good look at you." Qin Yining laughed and said, "We were escorted to the capital because we committed a crime. How can we ask for an imperial physician just because we want to? If we ask for an imperial physician immediately after we arrive, your majesty will most likely die of anger." Her tone was very relaxed, but her voice was weak and hoarse. Pang Xiao's heart ached when he heard this. He did not answer Qin Yining's words. Instead, he said, "If I knew that you would suffer so much, I wouldn't have wanted a child." "What are you saying?" Qin Yining held Pang Xiao's hand. She closed her eyes and said in a low voice, "Even if you don't want to be a father, I still want to be a mother. This isn't just about you. As long as our child can be born safely and live a healthy life, I will be satisfied. Moreover, look at which mother isn't like this. You and my mother also suffered so much in the past. That's why people say that if you don't raise your child, you won't know your parents' kindness. When we go back in the future, we have to be filial to our mother." Pang Xiao saw that she was clearly very tired, but still had to raise her spirit to comfort him. He felt even more distressed. "All right, I'll listen to you. Take advantage of the fact that you don't feel so bad right now and quickly sleep for a while. We'll be in the suburbs of the capital soon. I don't know if there's anyone waiting for us there. If your majesty doesn't act up immediately, I'll ask the imperial physician to take a good look at you." Qin Yining heard this and could only obediently nod. In addition, she was indeed tired. She closed her eyes and hugged Pang Xiao's waist. She found a comfortable position in his arms and fell into a deep sleep not long after. Pang Xiao stretched out his arms and covered her with the blanket. The weather at the end of April was still a bit cold. Qin Yining was especially afraid of the cold right now. They had seen many physicians along the way. Everyone said that Qin Yining's body was weak and that it was not the best time to conceive. Every time Pang Xiao heard this, he regretted it very much. He felt that he should not have allowed Qin Yining to have a child when her body was at its weakest. But since she already had a child, they had to do their best to protect this child. Pang Xiao closed his eyes and did not let go of Qin Yining's arm for a moment. In his mind, he was thinking about the deployment after they arrived in the capital. Jinghu Wei had already inquired about the general situation and he had a rough idea in his heart. Now, it was up to the people around him to see if they had a tacit understanding. Especially him and Jilan. Because Pang Xiao knew that Your Majesty would definitely choose a time when he was least able to retaliate to attack him. And this time would definitely be when he and Qin Yining had just returned to the capital and did not have time to make any arrangements. Everything was developing in the direction that Pang Xiao had guessed in his heart. Just as Prince Zhongshuan's ceremonial procession neared the northern suburbs, they bumped into the troops from the capital's military barracks. When Ibingu saw his own people, he immediately felt as if he had finally returned home. He happily greeted them. "Did your Majesty order you to come?" The general leading the troops was called Sun Guang. He was quite familiar with Ibingu. After they met and greeted each other, Sun Guang said, "Yes, I am here to welcome Prince Zhongshuan's ceremonial procession into the capital. I have been waiting here for many days. Your Majesty thought that Wang Yi would be back in a few days, so he ordered me to wait here." When Ibingu heard this, he felt helpless. Since they had already arrived in the capital, shouldn't your Majesty have directly arranged for people to arrest Pang Shao and his men and be done with it? But now, he had ordered the soldiers from the capital's military barracks to come out of the city to welcome them. This was equivalent to giving Pang Shao enough face. Ibingu had not expected this kind of situation. At this time, Pang Shao had already gotten off the carriage. Because Qin Yining was not feeling well, his expression was somewhat serious. He said in a low voice, "So it is General Sunday. I will have to trouble General Sun to thank your Majesty on behalf of this king." Sun Guang immediately cupped his hands in greeting to Pang Shao and said, "Wang Yi, it is best that you personally thank your Majesty. However, your Majesty has also said that you have just returned." He asked Wang Yi and Wang Fei to temporarily stay in the manor outside the city. The preparations there have already been made. Tomorrow is the court assembly. Your Majesty has asked Wang Yi and Wang Fei to attend court together. At that time, you will have plenty of opportunities to personally thank your Majesty. When Ibingu heard this, he was immediately overjoyed. So your Majesty had arranged it like this. Is he planning to first put Pang Shao and his group under house arrest outside the city, not allowing them any time to prepare, and then come to court tomorrow to judge them? Thinking of this, Ibingu almost laughed out loud. Pang Shao naturally understood Li Qitian's intentions, but he was not afraid. He only said, "Many thanks to your Majesty for the arrangements. However, my wife is pregnant. Has the manor arranged a physician?" Along the way, Ibingu had secretly reported that Qin Yining was pregnant. Along the way, he had stopped to look for a physician. Therefore, Li Qitian had already known about this news. Now that Pang Shao had asked about it in person, Sun Guang naturally could not say that your Majesty had not arranged anything. He immediately said, "This general will immediately invite a physician for Wang Fei." Pang Shao said, "We don't need a normal physician. We need an imperial physician from the palace who specializes in the treatment of young women. Go and invite him. If you can't invite him, this king will personally go." This threat was very direct. Sun Guang would rather be beaten to death than let Pang Shao personally invite an imperial physician. If this person escaped on the way, they, the Jingji guards, would have to bear the consequences. Sun Guang repeatedly nodded and saluted. "Wang Yi, don't worry. This general will definitely do as you say." While Sun Guang ordered someone to invite an imperial physician, Pang Shao had already returned to the carriage and ordered the people to set off. Chapter 562. Qin Yining leaned on Pang Zhao's shoulder and lazily said, "Did you know about the manor that your Majesty arranged for us to live in before?" Pang Shao smiled and said, "I heard about it before. There are only a few imperial manors around the capital. But I didn't pay much attention to it." Qin Yining couldn't help but sneer and say, "Since he arranged for us to live there, he must have chosen a manor that you are not familiar with and that he can easily arrange. But we don't have to worry today. Your Majesty has already taken 99 steps. It's not that bad. For the sake of reputation, our safety tonight can be guaranteed." Hearing this, Pang Shao couldn't help but take her hand and kiss it. He had originally wanted to comfort Qin Yining. He had planned to say these words to comfort her, but he didn't expect her to think it through first. It had to be said that having a wife as intelligent and understanding as Qin Yining was a blessing for a person like him who would never have a peaceful life. The carriage slowly stopped outside the manor. The palace servants that had been arranged inside the manor hurriedly opened the main door of the manor. The eunuchs and palace maids split into 2 rows and knelt down on the left and right sides to give a grand salute. "Welcome Prince Zhongshuan, Princess Consort." Pang Shao saw such a grand scene and couldn't help but laugh. He whispered in Qin Yining's ear, "Are you tired? Don't worry about it for now. Let's go rest for a while." Qin Yining smiled and nodded. Seeing Pang Shao get off the carriage, she also wanted to lift the curtain and come out. Who knew that when she reached out, Pang Shao had already carried her out and strode into the manor. The palace servants and eunuchs naturally didn't dare to raise their heads and look around. They all lowered their heads and only watched as a pair of soap boots walked past them. When they heard the others' footsteps getting further and further away, they finally dared to stand up and walk into the manor in a row. Qin Yining was originally not used to being carried into the manor by Pang Shao like this. But seeing that no one dared to look, she finally felt a bit better. She blushed and rolled her eyes, saying in a low voice, "I didn't hurt my leg, there's no need to do this." "Your leg didn't hurt, but you didn't eat or sleep well on the way here. I feel sorry for you. It's just a few steps, let me do it for you." Qin Yining became more embarrassed by his words. Out of sight, out of mind, out of mind. She closed her eyes and leaned in his arms to sleep. Not long after, Pang Shao carried Qin Yining to the main house of the manor, surrounded by a group of people. "Everything has been arranged, already prepared. Everything's ready and your majesty's a visit. Your majesty's to ask Wang and Wang's to live in the main ants, yours, two's, please and princess to live in s." Pang Shao saw that this palace maid looked familiar and asked. The palace maid replying to Wang Yi, "This servant's name is Lan Qi. She used to be in the Empress Dowager's palace." Pang Shao nodded and remembered where she had seen her before. Lan Qi was indeed from the Empress Dowager's palace. But before Anyang Princess Royal married Jiziyu, the palace maid in charge was Lan Qi. Later, when she opened a Princess Fu outside, Lan Qi didn't go with her and stayed by the Empress Dowager's side. "I didn't think that your majesty would arrange for Lan Qi Gugu to come to the manor. This king is truly fearful. This king is extremely grateful that my humble wife can be taken care of by Lan Qi Gugu." Lan Qi quickly bowed and said she didn't dare. Then she called for the palace maids and eunuchs to lead Pang Shao and Qin Yining to the main hall. Even though Jing was further south than Taiten, it was still in the north. It was close to the 5th month and the weather was still slightly cold. There was a charcoal brazier burning in the main hall. The top of the brazier was smokeless and dust-free high-quality silver frost charcoal. Everything in the room was placed in an orderly manner. The decorations were luxurious and warm. Pang Shao carefully placed Qin Yining on the soft couch in the inner room. Then he turned around and ordered, "Wang Fei's health is heavy and she likes peace and quiet. If there are no orders, you don't have to come in to serve. Lan Qi can stay." The palace maids acknowledged and left. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. It was great that they didn't have to stay in the same room as Prince Zhongshuan. Lan Qi had a smile on her face as she helped Qin Yining settle down. Then she ordered people to prepare food. Pang Shao narrowed his eyes slightly and ordered, "Let them prepare the other people's food first. The palace will arrange for a grand physician to come. Wang Fei will have to ask the grand physician if she needs anything." Lan Qi's steps paused. In a blink, she understood Pang Zhao's meaning. Pang Shao was indirectly reminding them, the palace maids, not to do anything to Wang Fei's food. Your Majesty still cared about him, Wang Yi. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a grand welcome, and wouldn't have arranged for the palace maids to come to the estate to serve. He also wouldn't have arranged for a grand physician to treat Wang Fei. Lan Qi hurriedly responded, yes, Nubi will follow Wang Ye's orders. Nubi will not dare to neglect Wang Fei's food. Pang Shao didn't immediately respond. He looked at her with a serious expression. Lan Qi bent her knees, bent her waist, and lowered her head. Even though her calves were so tired that they were about to cramp, she still trembled and maintained her salutation posture. She could feel Pang Zhao's sharp gaze piercing into her back like a knife. For a moment, Lan Qi even felt that she would be dragged out and beheaded. Just as Lan Qi was about to cry in fright, a gentle and clear female voice came from the side. All right, what are you doing? Pang Zhao immediately walked over. Are you tired? His voice was extremely gentle and affectionate. Lan Qi looked up with trepidation and met the eyes of the woman who was reclining on the couch. For a moment, Lan Qi even thought that she was dreaming. Because this female was too beautiful. She didn't seem like a real person, but like a jade person carved from white jade. There wasn't a spot on her body that wasn't exquisite. No wonder. Compared to Prince Zhongshuan's Fei, Anyang Princess Royal wasn't enough. No wonder Wang Yi would be so soft for her. Qin Yining saw that the palace maid was trembling but still maintaining her salute. He couldn't help but say, stand, I'm slightly tired. Prepare some hot water. Yes. Lan Qi gratefully bowed and retreated. She knew inside that things like preparing hot water should have been done by the eunuchs. Wang Fei had her go out just to help her out. Qin Yining watched with a smile as she walked away. Then he pinched the back of Pang Zhao's hand. You're playing the bad person to show me the good person. No. Pang Zhao rubbed his nose and said with a smile, I'm just warning them. If someone thinks wrongly and hurts you, then wouldn't everything be too late? So I'm preparing for a rainy day, preventing trouble before it happens. Hearing this, Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh. You're right. He leaned on him and said, don't be too hard on unrelated people. The people living in the lower class don't have it easy. We should be on guard, but we shouldn't be too hard on people, especially not killing. We have a child now, we need to accumulate good fortune for the child. Pang Zhao looked at Qin Yining's gentle eyes and his heart became exceptionally warm. He leaned over and kissed Qin Yining's eyelashes. I'll listen to you. I will do more good deeds to accumulate good fortune for you and our child. At this time, Pang Zhao's heart was very nervous. Before Qin Yining spoke, he didn't pay attention to himself. He never believed in these metaphysical sayings, and only believed that man could conquer the heavens. But now that he had a weakness, and someone he cared about, Pang Zhao found that he started to worry about the sins he had committed in the past. He wasn't afraid of retribution for those things on himself, but he was afraid of harming Qin Yining and their child. Therefore, a person like him shouldn't have a weakness. If he had a burden, maybe he would have misgivings when he fought for his life. But Pang Zhao still rejoiced in everything he had now. After the hot water was prepared, Qin Yining and Pang Zhao washed up simply with the help of the palace servants. Not long after, Sun Guang rushed over with two of the most skilled physicians in the imperial hospital. Wang Yi, the imperial physicians are here. Pang Zhao nodded. He didn't plan to follow Sun Guang out and waited for the two to treat him. The two imperial physicians checked his pulse and didn't dare to delay. They went outside and explained Qin Yining's current symptoms to Pang Zhao. Pang Zhao was relieved to hear that their explanation was no different from what the physicians who had treated Qin Yining had said before. Thinking about it, Li Qitian wouldn't do anything to the imperial physicians. This also showed that Li Qitian must have set up a dangerous trap for Pang Zhao. He was already disdainful of these small fights. He was waiting to deal a fatal blow to Pang Zhao and Qin Yining. If it was anyone else, they would definitely feel nervous or afraid when they saw that they were going to face Li Qitian at the court assembly tomorrow. After all, the chances of a normal person succeeding in fighting against imperial power were minuscule. In history, there were many heroes who established countries and pacified the world, but in the end, they were killed by imperial power. However, Peng Xiao was not afraid at all. Instead, he was excited from the bottom of his heart. He was the kind of person who would face difficulties head-on. Retreating without a fight wasn't his style. Li Qitian had used roundabout methods for many years. Peng Xiao wanted to see what Li Qitian would do to kill him. While Peng Xiao and Qin Yining were resting in the imperial plantation, someone had already spread the news in the city. Prince Zhongshuan committed treason, yet your majesty still arranged for him to stay in the imperial plantation. Your majesty truly cherishes his subjects. It's a pity that this subject didn't strive for your majesty's glory and committed treason. He truly deserves to be killed. That's right. Your majesty is truly tolerant of Prince Zhongshuan. It's said that Prince Zhongshuan is so arrogant that he even dares to defy imperial edicts. When Qin Huaiyuan, second master, and third master were returning home in a carriage, there were people on the streets discussing how Peng Xiao had been placed in the imperial plantation. Second master trembled with fear when he heard this. He said in a low voice, "Big brother, they are." Qin Huaiyuan waved his hand with a gentle expression, indicating for second master to stop talking. Second master immediately understood and hurriedly shut his mouth. They were Qin Yining's maternal family. Presumably, your majesty had been monitoring them during this period of time. If they accidentally said something that angered your majesty, wouldn't their family suffer a calamity? The carriage slowly drove back to Qin Manor. Chapter 563. As soon as Qin Huaiyuan and his two younger brothers entered the main hall, they saw the Sun clan quickly walking out to greet them. "Master, did Sister Yi come back? When I was on the street today, I heard people talking about this matter." Qin Huaiyuan smiled and nodded. "Your Majesty, Hong En, arranged for Sister Yi and Wang Yi to live in the imperial manor outside the capital. The Sun clan said, but won't they come home? Sister Yi got married in June last year. I haven't seen her for almost a year. I really miss her. I don't know if she suffered in the Taiten. I also don't know if Wang Yi still trusts and loves her as much as before." Qin Huaiyuan saw that the Sun clan was frowning with worry as they spoke, so he smiled and said, "Don't worry. Wang Yi is an official that your majesty likes. How can he be someone who likes the new and hates the old? Sister Yi should be able to come home soon." At this time, the Sun clan also heard that Qin Huaiyuan's tone was different from usual. They immediately became alert and nodded with a stiff face. "Yes, master is right. Your majesty is a wise ruler, Wang Yi is a loyal official, and Sister Yi isn't an unvirtuous daughter-in-law. There shouldn't be any problems." Qin Huaiyuan nodded, and the family went to the back to pay their respects to the old madam. The old madam fell ill again a few days ago, so her spirit wasn't very good. In addition, she was too disappointed with Qin Huaiyuan. Now that she saw Qin Huaiyuan, she didn't have a good expression. Instead, she doted on her second son. After they saluted, the old madam said, "You're back. Brother Xiao, come sit with mother. It's warm." Second master nodded with a smile and sat in front of the old madam. Second madam also personally brought hot tea for them. The old madam didn't even look at her eldest son and eldest daughter-in-law. She didn't even look at third master. She pulled second master and chatted enthusiastically. Finally, they talked about Prince Zhongshuan's return to the capital. "I just heard them say it. Is it true?" Second master's expression froze. Who was so talkative that they actually told the old madam about what happened outside? The old madam's health wasn't good. She needed to rest. The most important thing was that Pang Shao was sent to the imperial plantation. People who didn't know that Your Majesty cared for his subjects, but those who knew that it was a disguised house arrest in disguise. They didn't know what would happen next. They didn't know what would happen next. In that kind of situation, he didn't know if it would implicate the Qin family. Therefore, there must be many pairs of eyes watching the Qin family now. Second Old Master was very worried that Old Madam would say something unpleasant that would cause trouble when it reached His Majesty's ears. He immediately looked at Qin Huayuan for help. In the past, his eldest brother was more experienced in dealing with such matters. But now, he couldn't think of how to deal with it. Qin Huayuan received his second master's gaze and said, "Mother, rest well and recuperate. You can't meddle in the matters outside. Asking will only be a waste of time." Hearing this, the old madam immediately said angrily, "What? I don't even have the qualifications to ask. You took away my power to manage the affairs of the general public, and now you want me to be blind, deaf, and mute? You unfilial son." Qin Huayuan said helplessly, "Mother, calm down. Don't get angry. Be careful not to hurt your body." Old Madam said, "If you talk less, I might be able to live for a few more years. Besides, I'm talking to Brother Shou. Why are you interrupting?" The old madam said earnestly to her second master, "There are many rumors outside. They all say that Pang Zhishi failed to live up to Your Majesty's good intentions. He betrayed the country and surrendered to the Taiten for a woman. Now that he's back, I don't know how Your Majesty will deal with him. Our family is unlucky to have become in-laws with the Pang family. It's all because of Sister Yi, that troublemaker, who brought disaster to our family. Now, looking at Your Majesty's attitude, perhaps he will convict the Pang family. Fortunately, only Sister Yi married into the Pang family. I'm wise. I didn't marry Miss 8 to the Pang family. Otherwise, wouldn't something big happen? What I mean is, all of you better behave yourselves and cut off all ties with the Yun family. Don't let them drag you down. Our family has gone through so many ups and downs. It's not easy for us to live a stable life now. I don't want anything to happen to our family because of this matter. I can't afford it." The old madam shook her head as she spoke. She looked as if the heavens had turned their backs on her, but she was still very kind. Madam Sun was infuriated when she heard this. If this old madam wasn't Qin Huayuan's biological mother, she would have already slapped her. Ungrateful, despicable, and shameless people were exactly this kind of people. The Sun clan didn't feel like quarreling with this old woman. They also felt that if they angered her to death, it wouldn't be worth it to bear the infamy for her in the future. Therefore, they got up and went out. The old madam looked at the Sun clan's back and sneered. "You can't teach your daughter well, and now you're putting on airs with me." Second master, third master, and second madam were very embarrassed. Especially when they saw Qin Huayuan's face become more and more unsightly. Third master persuaded, "Eldest brother, don't take it to heart. Mother is old and somewhat muddle-headed." When the old madam heard this, she threw a pillow at him on the spot. "You're raised by a lowly woman. It's your turn to talk about me. Get out." It was true that third master was a concubine's son, but in the early years of the Dayan imperial court, the entire family's expenses, except for Qin Huayuan's and second master's monthly salary, were mostly paid by the third branch. Third master and the late third madam had contributed a lot to the family back then. Now, the old madam actually didn't remember the good at that time and scolded them. Third master couldn't bear it anymore. He stood up and snorted coldly, "You said that others can't teach their daughter well. I want to know what kind of person can teach a mother like you. Heartless, ungrateful. You never remember what others have done for you. You turn hostile and refuse to recognize them when they're slightly inferior to your thoughts. You actually deserve to be the head of the family. Rebel, rebel. Drive this vile spawn out. There's no need to drive me out. I'm too lazy to look at you. Since you don't treat me as your son, I also don't want to be a part of your family. Third master turned and left. When he reached the door, he said, eldest brother and second brother also saw it. It's not that I'm unreasonable, but the old madam is really hateful. You two are biological brothers, but you should be on guard. Don't let the old madam instigate dissension. If we three brothers are not united, the family will be broken. The old madam was so angry that she covered her chest with one hand and pointed at third master with the other. She couldn't help but cough. Third master lifted the curtain and went out. Only then did she fiercely spit. At this time, other than Mammy Chin, there was only Qin Huayuan, second master, and his wife left in the room. Qin Huayuan then said, Mother is a smart person. She knows how to judge the situation. I won't say much. Presumably, Mother knows about these things. This son will take his leave first. Qin Huayuan stood up and saluted before retreating. The old madam turned her head and didn't look at Qin Huayuan. However, from the corner of her eyes, she kept looking at his figure as he left. Seeing that he didn't turn back even once, she was even angrier. In the end, he was the son she used to love the most. Now, because of his wife and child, he was separated from her and ignored his efforts all these years. The old madam was overcome with grief. She pulled second master and began to complain tearfully, My life is bitter. After marrying into the family, I didn't have a good life. Back then, your father. Second master could only listen quietly. He felt very helpless in his heart. However, the old madam was his biological mother. When encountering this kind of thing, he couldn't hit or scold her. He could only endure. Second madam had long heard the old madam's complaints. Calluses had already formed in her ears. She was too lazy to pay attention to the increasingly unreasonable old madam. She also quietly retreated. When she lifted the curtain and went out, she saw Qin Huayuan standing in the corridor with his hands behind his back. Second madam sighed softly and walked forward, saying, Eldest uncle, don't be sad. Mother is in the spring and autumn period. She is indeed a bit muddle-headed. Sometimes, her mind isn't clear, so the words she says are probably unintentional. Qin Huayuan greeted second madam. He maintained a distance of 3 steps and said, Younger sister-in-law is right. Whatever mother says, we can't do. As her children, we can only listen. Second madam understood the meaning behind his words. In any case, the decisions in the family weren't made by the old madam. Regardless of what the old madam thought, he could only close the door and abuse his power at home. Second madam said worriedly, Sister Yi has already arrived at the imperial plantation with Wang Yi, right? That's right. Qin Huayuan smiled at second madam and said, Your Majesty is kind-hearted. Our family will be reunited very soon. When they were chatting, Qin Huayuan actually said, Your Majesty is kind-hearted every time he opened his mouth. Second madam was alarmed and immediately nodded in agreement, saying, That's right. Your Majesty has always been kind to Wang Yi. At this moment, whether it was Qin Huayuan, second old master, third old master, second madam, or the Sun clan, they all understood in their hearts. Your Majesty's eyes and ears were probably watching the entire in-law family. Their every move would be heard by Your Majesty. If they were already like this at home, then what about Pang Zhao's family, who had just returned to the capital? They didn't know what kind of inescapable net had been set up in the imperial plantation. It was likely that Qin Yining and Pang Zhao were also being closely monitored and had no freedom to speak of. It would be fine if they were being monitored, but the most important thing was that none of them knew what Your Majesty was planning to do next. The entire family seemed to be going on as usual. They were just going through their days in a noisy manner. Qin Huaiyuan, on the other hand, didn't sleep well the entire night. At this juncture, he didn't dare to inform the in-laws' family. He could only hope that the in-laws' family was smart and wouldn't suddenly appear and be captured by Your Majesty to be used as a hostage to threaten Pang Shao. When it was time for court the next day, Qin Huaiyuan and second old master left early and headed straight for the palace. Just as their official sedan arrived in front of the palace gates, they were blocked by a line of Jingji guards. "Sirs, please wait for a moment. Prince Zhongshuan and Princess Consort's carriage has arrived. Please wait for a moment before entering." Qin Huaiyuan, who was sitting upright and resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. He immediately lifted the curtain of the sedan and stood out. He passed through the crowd in front of him. Qin Huaiyuan saw Pang Xiao's carriage slowly stop not far away. Pang Xiao nimbly dismounted from his horse and then walked to the side of the magnificent carriage that followed closely behind. He personally lifted the beautiful warm curtain and carefully helped Qin Yining, who was dressed to the nines, out of the carriage. Chapter 564. Qin Yining was helped out of the carriage by Pang Xiao. She raised her eyes and looked around. She saw many soldiers from the capital barracks separating the two sides of the road, and the official sedans were blocked on both sides. Your Majesty made such a big scene, but Prince Zhongshuan didn't allow the other official sedans to pass. He even made so many soldiers separate the two sides of the road. Obviously, he wanted to show his favor to Prince Zhongshuan and let everyone present feel the domineering attitude of Prince Zhongshuan. Qin Yining sneered in her heart. She felt that Li Qitian's methods were becoming more and more petty. She especially liked to play tricks on this kind of thing. She was no different from a woman in the inner courtyard. Pang Xiao saw that Qin Yining's exquisitely made-up face was a little angry. She smiled and comforted her. "Sister Yi, don't be like this. Don't let others have their way and hurt yourself." Qin Yining nodded. Ever since she was pregnant, she seemed to be particularly easily affected. This was indeed not good for her health. She helped Pang Xiao out of the carriage. Qin Yining raised her eyes. Suddenly, she saw a pair of familiar eyes through the crowd. It was her father. That pair of eyes, which were very similar to hers, was now full of joy and care. Across the crowd, he stretched his neck and anxiously wanted to see her situation clearly. Qin Yining's tears suddenly came, and she almost cried on the spot. Her father was such an outstanding person, like a banished immortal. Now, like thousands of fathers in the world, he was excitedly looking forward to his child. Seeing that Qin Huaiyuan had lost a lot of weight, Qin Yining felt very guilty in her heart. Something happened to her this time. Her father must be very anxious. Qin Yining knew about the chaotic situation at home, even if others didn't say anything. Her father might have been under all kinds of pressure and still protected her as before. Qin Yining's tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to walk to Qin Huaiyuan's side. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and nodded at her, but waved his hand, indicating that she shouldn't go over. He could see that his daughter had gone through a lot of hardships. Although she had lost a lot of weight and looked weaker than before, Pang Xiao's attitude towards her was still the same as before. It was obvious that Pang Xiao didn't mind that Qin Yining had been kidnapped to the Titan at all. In Qin Huaiyuan's opinion, as long as the couple was of one mind, he would be very satisfied. Pang Xiao followed Qin's line of sight and saw Qin Huaiyuan. Although many civil and military officials were present before the court meeting, Pang Xiao thought about it. Anyway, the current situation was already like this. Moreover, with his deployment, your majesty would probably deeply hate his faction in the future. Qin Huaiyuan was his father-in-law. With your majesty's character, he would definitely divide him into his faction. Therefore, Pang Xiao didn't avoid it. He simply took Qin Yining's hand and walked towards Qin Huaiyuan. The crowd couldn't help but look over. The scene was silent for a moment. Qin Huaiyuan frowned at first, then figured it out. He looked at Pang Xiao and Qin Yining with a smile. Qin Xiaoyuan pulled Qin Huaiyuan worriedly. "Big brother, don't worry." Qin Huaiyuan comforted him. At this time, Pang Xiao and Qin Yining had already arrived in front of them. Even the soldiers of the Jingji guards made way for them. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao walked side by side to Qin Huaiyuan and saluted together. "Father. Father-in-law. Okay, you may rise." Qin Huaiyuan supported them with each hand. He first smiled at Pang Xiao, then looked at Qin Yining and said, "You've lost weight. But it's good that you can come back." "Yes. Father, I'm very good." Fortunately, Wang Yi arrived in time this time. "Although I experienced a thrilling experience, I'm not seriously injured." That's good. Qin Huaiyuan smiled and nodded repeatedly. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao saw Qin Xiaoyuan on the side. "Second uncle. Okay. It's good that you're safe." Qin Xiaoyuan was also very happy, and his eyes were already red. Pang Xiao said, "Father-in-law, you don't have to worry. Although Sister Yi was kidnapped and experienced a lot of difficulties, she is smart and strong. She can always turn danger into safety. Now that Sister Yi is 3 months pregnant, father-in-law will be able to hold your grandson by the end of the year." Qin Huaiyuan and Qin Xiaoyuan were both stunned. Qin Huaiyuan couldn't help but secretly calculate. He was sure that Qin Yining's child was Pang Xiao's. His daughter was not defiled by the Taten, nor was she disliked by his son-in-law. He immediately nodded happily, and even threw away the immortal aura he had for many years. He laughed and said, Okay. Let's go home later. We'll eat well. You're too thin like this." Qin Xiaoyuan also said happily, "Yes, your mother and your second aunt miss you very much." Qin Yining was a little shy. "How are mother and second aunt? Is everyone at home okay?" They're fine. You'll know when you go home and see them after the court meeting." Qin Huaiyuan said with a smile. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. The originally heavy atmosphere was diluted by this small talk. Qin Yining was originally a little worried, but when he saw Qin Huaiyuan's natural expression, as if he had a card up his sleeve, and Pang Xiao's calm expression, he thought that since he was pregnant, Pang Xiao would not tell him some things. He must have already made arrangements outside. Qin Yining's originally worried heart was also half relieved. While they were talking, Pang Xiao had already instructed the Jingji guards who were blocking the other officials. "In the future, you don't have to do this kind of thing anymore. Everyone is a loyal subject of your majesty. It's just the heads of the departments. Do you want to compete with each other and make our relationship worse? Who ordered you to do this?" Pang Xiao's words were already accusing the other party of trying to sow discord between him and the other officials. How could the Jingji guards dare to directly say that this was your majesty's order? Immediately, he could only withdraw in embarrassment to avoid causing any more trouble. The officials who were closer to them vaguely understood something after hearing this conversation. However, they were only ordinary officials after all. They did not want to truly participate in the court battles, so they naturally did not want to speak too much outside. However, if they chatted with trusted relatives behind their backs, or said things like, "I'm only telling you, don't tell anyone else," it was inevitable that today's matter would be spread. Pang Xiao's goal would be achieved sooner or later. This was the first time that Qin Yining had seen a court meeting. Because of Li Qitian's special instructions, Pang Xiao and Qin Yining could only temporarily bid farewell to Qin Huayuan and Qin Shouyuan and wait for Your Majesty to summon them. This was not the first time that Qin Yining had faced such an urgent situation, but it was the first time that she did not participate. Pang Xiao was worried about her health and did not allow her to participate in anything. Qin Yining also did not know what was going on. Although she trusted Pang Xiao, she was still very worried. Feeling that her palms were sweaty, Pang Xiao could not help but take her hands and wipe them on his imperial court robes. Don't be afraid. Nothing will happen. I will definitely protect you and our family. Qin Yining smiled bitterly. Of course I believe you. However, the current situation does not seem optimistic. You are not willing to tell me anything. I don't know anything, so of course I will be worried. Pang Xiao chuckled and said, All right, I already said that you will follow me in the future. Just focus on enjoying your life. There is no need to worry about these things. Isn't it good that I have taken care of everything? Of course, Qin Yining felt that this was very good. But when she thought of the present situation, it was impossible for her to not care at all. Just as Qin Yining frowned and did not speak, and Pang Xiao was worried and wanted to come forward to comfort her, the eunuch's voice suddenly came from the outside. Your Majesty has decreed that the Prince Zhongshuan and Wang Fei are summoned to court to discuss politics. This subject obeys. Pang Xiao helped Qin Yining straighten her clothes. He pulled her hand close to his lips and kissed it. He said, Don't worry. Trust me. Qin Yining looked at him and nodded solemnly. Now that things had come to this point, she couldn't afford to be overcautious. No matter if they succeeded or failed, they were together. The two of them followed the eunuch all the way to the Hall of Political Harmony. Inside, the eunuch's voice was loud and sharp. It traveled far out of nowhere, and in the spacious hall, it shook people's eardrums. Not long after, the eunuch's voice came from inside the hall, Prince Zhongshuan and Wang Fei are summoned for an audience. Pang Xiao pulled Qin Yining's hand and patted it. Then he turned and walked up the stairs before her. His steps were steady as he walked into the hall. Qin Yining looked at the hall and took a deep breath. His gaze then landed on Pang Xiao's tall back. He smiled and slowly followed. The atmosphere in Zhenghe Hall was very tense. There was a faint murderous aura. The arrival of Pang Xiao and Qin Yining did not ease this atmosphere. Instead, it made the situation almost tense. After Qin Yining entered the hall, she lowered her eyes. She displayed all the etiquette she had learned from the etiquette instructor. She did not want anyone to find fault with her. Everyone had seen Pang Xiao many times, but this was the first time they had seen this Pang Xiao's enemy's daughter, who had stolen by force and then married Pang Xiao's enemy's daughter. They had been very curious about Qin Huayuan's daughter. Now that they had seen her at such a close distance, many people couldn't help but think, as expected. If she hadn't been born with such a beautiful appearance, how could Prince Zhongshuan have forgotten about revenge? No matter what, Qin Yining had seen a lot of things. She just ignored the curious and malicious gazes of these people when they stared at her. She followed behind Pang Xiao in a dignified manner. Then, she approached Li Qitian and saluted him. Li Qitian said with a face full of smiles, Beloved official, rise. Many thanks to your majesty. After Pang Xiao stood, she did not forget to turn around and help Qin Yining up. When the ministers saw this, they had more and more ideas about what to do. Li Qitian said with a face full of smiles, This time, I had beloved official come with Wang Fei because of the sudden death of Tatan Nari Khan. Beloved official, you also know that the current Eugene Khan of Tatan is not letting go of this matter. He insists that it was consort Prince Zhongshuan who killed him. Right now, he is sending cavalry to invade our Dezhou border. Li Qitian looked at Qin Yining and asked gently, Wang Fei should have an explanation for this matter. Chapter 565. Qin Yining was expressionless, but she sneered in her heart. She took a step forward and saluted, reporting to Your Majesty, Before she could finish, she was interrupted by a high-pitched male voice full of anger. A middle-aged imperial censor angrily came forward and saluted, Your Majesty, I have something to say. Li Qitian seemed to be very surprised and frowned unhappily, Minister Gu, I am asking a question. Isn't it inappropriate for you to suddenly interrupt the Prince Zhongshuan? Your Majesty, I know it is rude of me to do so, but I am a straightforward person. It's just that this subject is a straightforward person. Seeing someone trying to bewitch His Majesty with flowery words and yet still trying to put on a virtuous face, this subject had no choice but to speak up. Imperial Censor Gu saluted and continued, Your Majesty, please listen to me. If what I said is wrong and not true, I will accept Your Majesty's punishment. Li Qitian frowned as if he was caught in a dilemma. Seeing Imperial Censor Gu's sincerity, he could only smile and say, Fine, you can speak first. Yes. Imperial Censor Gu saluted excitedly and said with righteous indignation, Your Majesty, as an Imperial Censor, I have to report the 10 major crimes of the Prince Zhongshuan. Indiscriminately killing the innocent and without mercy, the first crime is, being arrogant and humiliating the old officials of Northern Ji, the second crime is, being greedy and causing a misunderstanding between you and your subjects, the third crime is, forcefully seizing a woman and ignoring Your Majesty's wishes, the fourth crime is, leaving the capital without an imperial decree, intending to take the treasure for yourself, the fifth crime is, being corrupt and disregarding the lives of the common people, the sixth crime is, being greedy for power, being jealous of the talents of your colleagues, the seventh crime is, forming a clique for personal gain, privately raising soldiers, and having evil intentions, the eighth crime is, being unfilial and unfaithful, disrespecting your official mother, and being a son in vain, the ninth crime is, disobeying the imperial decree, disrespecting Your Majesty, and defecting from another country, the most heinous crime is such an arrogant, rebellious, unfilial, disloyal, and unrighteous person. His crimes are too numerous to be recorded. I beseech Your Majesty to punish him severely. This subject agrees. Replying to Your Majesty, this subject also agrees. Prince Zhongshuan is a vassal in vain. Your Majesty, please punish him severely and uphold the imperial court's discipline. As soon as Imperial Censor Gu's voice fell, more than 10 people immediately stood up and echoed loudly. With the crowd's excitement, it was possible to believe that Pang Xiao was a bandit who committed all sorts of crimes, such as burning, killing, and looting. Li Qitian sat at the head of the table. His eyebrows were slightly furrowed, as if he couldn't bear the blow but was forcing himself to remain calm. However, Pang Xiao, Qin Yining, Qin Huayuan and Qin Xiuyuan didn't say a word. They didn't defend themselves at all. On the other hand, many of the nobles saw through the trick. They guessed that the greatest reason Your Majesty had arranged for today's meeting was that Pang Xiao's achievements were too great to overshadow Your Majesty. They were the same as Pang Xiao. They had followed Li Qitian to conquer the world in exchange for their current achievements. Pang Xiao was their benchmark. If he fell, they would probably be next. Thus, many of the nobles stood up and argued for Pang Xiao on the spot. These people also had officials they were close to, as well as colleagues in the same faction. They also took advantage of the situation and stood up to argue with the imperial censors. Seeing the nobles enter the fray, Li Qitian's subordinates also joined in. Seeing the other side gradually grow stronger, some of Pang Xiao's acquaintances stepped forward to intervene. For a moment, the scene was as chaotic as a vegetable market. When these officials quarreled, they were even more valiant than those in the marketplace. Quoting classics was even more offensive and persuasive than cursing. Li Qitian's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. He never would have thought that at this juncture, there would be so many people willing to speak up for Pang Xiao. It seemed that Pang Xiao's position in the hearts of the court officials and common people was no longer what he had thought it was. Li Qitian couldn't help but secretly rejoice that he had acted early. If he had given Pang Xiao more time to grow stronger, he would have taken root even more firmly. It would have been even more difficult to shake his foundation. The two sides argued in full swing. Both sides argued for what was right. This was the first time a debate of this scale had occurred in a court assembly since the founding of Dezhou. Qin Yining listened with his head bowed. He couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. Imperial Censor Gu had stepped forward today. He must have been acting on Li Qitian's orders. He believed that Li Qitian must have a backup plan. Although Pang Xiao was now a scholar of Wuying Palace, he was born a general and had accumulated great power in the military. Even among the common people, most of them knew of the reputation of war god Wang Yi. Thus, how could Li Qitian not arrange troops to deal with Pang Xiao? Currently, the Jingji Guard, the Divine Strategy Battalion, and the 3,000 Battalion were stationed near the capital. The other force worth mentioning was the Tiger Army stationed in the fields on the outskirts of the capital. Qin Yining's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He couldn't help but size up the officials who had come to the Political Harmony Palace Hall out of the corner of his eye. During the court assembly, all officials of the 4th rank and above were allowed to participate. However, Ji Ziyu wasn't among these people. Qin Yining's pupils constricted, but his expression remained calm. He reminded himself not to panic and not to be caught red-handed. When he looked carefully, he discovered that Ji Ziyu really wasn't here today. Qin Yining's heart sank. If Ji Ziyu commanded the Tiger Army and worked with the Jingji Guard, the 3,000 Battalion, and the Divine Strategy Battalion to encircle Pang Xiao, it was impossible for him to win with just the 50 or so Jinghu Wei in Pang Xiao's hands. As for the City Defense Army of the 5 Cities Warden's office, when he entered the city today, he discovered that these people were moving around more frequently than before. It seemed that Li Qitian had made thorough preparations today and planned to take down Pang Xiao in one fell swoop. As for those related to Pang Xiao, thinking of this, Qin Yining suddenly took a deep breath and forced herself to stop thinking about it. First of all, Pang Xiao wasn't a brainless and rash person. Since he dared to bring her to this feast at Hongmen today, he must have made sufficient preparations. He wasn't the kind of person who would get slapped on the left side of his face and get slapped on the right side. Moreover, he wasn't the kind of person who would disregard his family. Secondly, if Li Qitian wanted to succeed today, he would probably have to go through the public's opinion. As long as he grasped the situation well, there was still room for maneuvering. Pang Xiao was actually very worried about Qin Yining's condition. He was afraid that her panic would affect the baby. However, after observing her performance, he saw that her expression was normal and that she wasn't pretending to be calm. Instead, she was panicking for a moment before slowly coming to terms with the situation. He praised her in his heart. It was truly his fortune to have such a sensible wife. At this time, the debate between the two branches had reached a climax. Suddenly, many of the neutral officials noticed that Your Majesty's chief eunuch, Li Guanwen, had hurriedly walked over to Li Qitian's side with his head lowered and whispered a few words in his ear. Everyone couldn't help but be curious. Li Guanwen hadn't appeared in court today. What had happened when he suddenly appeared now? Li Qitian took advantage of the heated argument below to ask Li Guanwen in a low voice, "Why hasn't Jilan brought anyone here yet?" Li Guanwen's face was almost wrinkled into a bitter gourd. He had a constipated expression on his face as he stammered in a low voice, "Your Majesty," Prince Consort Ji said, said, "There are strange movements in the Tiger Army's barracks. He can't leave and has to stay in the barracks to oversee it." When Li Qitian heard this, he exerted force in his hand and almost broke the string of yellow jade beads he was playing with. He didn't show any signs of abnormality and reprimanded in a low voice, "What's going on? Didn't you see the Tiger Army situation last time? Ji Ziyu's control of the Tiger Army doesn't lose to Pang Zhao's. Why would there be strange movements at such a crucial moment? Is there really something strange going on, or is he unwilling to come and help us?" Li Guanwen was so scared that he didn't dare to say a word. At this time, the more he said, the more mistakes he would make. Li Qitian glanced at the people in court and found that many people had begun to look in his direction. He hurriedly restrained his expression and put on his original expression of worrying about court matters. He gritted his teeth and said, "The current situation can turn chaotic at any time. What if it's really safe? Stay in the barracks. We need him to protect us. If he doesn't come, who is he staying in the barracks for?" Li Guanwen was scolded like a quail. He wanted to quickly retreat to the side and pretend to be invisible, but he couldn't not pass on Ji Ziyu's words. He could only say, "Prince Consort Ji said, if something happens, Prince Consort Ji must protect your Majesty's safety even if he has to risk his life." "My life?" Li Qitian almost cursed. If he waited for Ji Ziyu to sacrifice his life, he might have already been killed by that traitor Pang Zhao. Li Qitian was very angry. The deployed imperial censor participated in the Pang Zhao, but there was a problem with the military generals. It should be known that Pang Zhao had a deep foundation among the people and had a very high status in the hearts of the people. If they couldn't attack him from both inside and outside, it was almost impossible to succeed this time. If they couldn't kill him with one blow this time and gave him a chance to breathe, things would become more and more difficult and dangerous in the future. Li Qitian fiercely ordered Li Guanwen in a low voice, "Go and urge him again for us." "Yes, Your Majesty." Li Guanwen wiped the sweat off his face, but he didn't dare to show it. He hurriedly retreated. At this time, the debate among the court officials became more and more chaotic. It was still the debate between those who wanted to impeach Pang Zhao and those who wanted to explain Pang Zhao's actions. The two sides even began to attack each other. Many people's hidden secrets were about to be revealed. Li Qitian originally only pretended to be worried, but he was actually very appreciative of these people's attacks on Pang Zhao. He felt that these people's words hit the bottom of his heart, making him feel very comfortable. But now, Li Qitian was really worried. If Pang Zhao really rebelled in a moment of desperation, with his martial arts, perhaps only Ji Ziyu in the entire capital could match him. Pang Zhao's attacks were fast and ruthless. If he finally shed all pretense of cordiality and got close to him, Li Qitian was afraid that he would die before Ji Ziyu came to save him. At this time, a young man wearing the uniform of a small eunuch walked up from the side. Li Qitian's pupils contracted. He had a bad premonition in his heart. This young man was not an ordinary eunuch. He was a secret agent that he raised. He specialized in spying and assassinating for him. Usually, they communicated in secret. But today, in an occasion like this court meeting, he changed into a eunuch's uniform and came out in the open. Li Qitian couldn't help but wonder if something had happened outside. Chapter 566. That young man whispered two things into Li Qitian's ear. "Your Majesty, this subject has been investigating outside and discovered that the Liu clan situation has changed. The Liu clan's clan head has committed suicide by jumping into a well. The current clan head has been replaced by Liu Heng from the main branch. In addition, the Liu clan's former clan head has suddenly stopped transporting the provisions to the border. This subject thought that it must be the new clan head, Liu Heng's orders. Because this happened so suddenly, this subject felt that this matter was very serious, so I hurriedly came to report to your majesty. At this time, Li Qitian felt as if he had been struck by lightning. Wasn't Lu Heng dead? Previously, his spies had gone to the border to investigate and discovered that Qin Yiming had returned with Pang Xiao. After several investigations, they found out that Lu Heng had died of a serious illness when he was in Taitan. At that time, Li Qitian had thought that the Lu clan's troublemaker was finally dead. The new clan head was a sensible person who was obedient and easy to manipulate. But who would have thought that a person who was supposed to be dead would suddenly appear, and the clan head of the Lu clan, whom he thought was very useful, would suddenly jump into a well and commit suicide. If one were to say that Pang Xiao's deliberate design and Lu Heng's wanton assassination, Li Qitian would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. The Lu clan's financial resources, material resources, and connections were not something he could compare to. Even though he was now the emperor, he could be considered to be extremely wealthy. However, the wealth and power that he truly grasped was not much. Li Qitian had been in power for less than 5 years, but the amount of money in the national treasury was getting smaller and smaller, and he was unable to make ends meet. There were so many troublesome matters in the world. Today, there was a disaster here, tomorrow, there would be bandits there. One matter after another would have to be dealt with by his hands. Those idiots below him only knew how to open their big mouths and ask him for money. The Lu family had a deep foundation. Many times, in order to achieve his goals, Li Qitian even had to flatter the Lu family. This time, when the Taitan declared war, de Zhou really did not have the money to fight back. Thus, the task of transporting the army provisions was undertaken by Second Master Lu, who had just become the head of the household. But now, this path had been cut off by that guy, Lu Heng. The two factions in the imperial court each expressed their own opinion. For a moment, they were evenly matched, but no one could tell what was going on. Ji Ziyu also said that the Tiger army was acting strangely and could not enter the palace to help. Now, the Lu clan was causing trouble for him. Li Qitian really felt that he was in a dilemma. Should the current situation be allowed to continue to develop? The change in the head of the Lu family had caused the delivery of the rations to be stopped halfway. This was actually just a matter of adding firewood, which did not affect the current situation at all. If Ji Ziyu could quickly deal with the unrest in the Tiger army and rush over in time, he should have a chance to take down Pang Xiao in one fell swoop. As for Lu Heng, he did not believe that the survival of these aristocratic families would not consider the imperial power. He could persuade them emotionally and logically and offer them benefits. As the saying goes, there are no common enemies, only common interests. As long as his interests were on the same line as the Lu family's, he believed that he could pull Lu Heng over to his side. Li Qitian frowned and pondered for a moment. Then, he felt relieved. At this time, the imperial censors were arguing so loudly that spittle flew everywhere. They were on the verge of fighting. Li Qitian was annoyed by the noise. Moreover, it would not be good for his reputation if word of this situation spread out. He raised his hand and gestured, "Everyone, shut up." In the end, Li Qitian's voice was not louder than these people. They were still arguing. When Pang Xiao saw Li Qitian's appearance, he stood up and reprimanded in a deep voice, "Everyone, shut up. Did you not hear your Majesty's order?" Imperial Censor Gu, "Everyone, a person who had just been accused of not respecting his superiors was able to pay attention to your Majesty's every move. When your Majesty ordered him to shut up, he was able to make others listen to your Majesty's orders. And the people who accused Pang Xiao just now did not care about your Majesty's intentions at all." This kind of contrast was too strong and too embarrassing. Some people who supported Pang Xiao stood up and cupped their hands. "Your Majesty has also seen it. Prince Zhongshuan's temperament is straightforward. Perhaps he has been in the military for a long time and his behavior is a bit uncouth. However, he is definitely not someone who disobeys his superiors. Those accusations just now were simply fabricated. Since Imperial Censor Gu is so loyal to the Emperor, why did Prince Zhongshuan have to remind him to shut up? Exactly. Your Majesty, this subject believes that Prince Zhongshuan's military exploits are splendid. Back then, he made great contributions in conquering Dezhou. Prince Zhongshuan is also Your Majesty's sworn brother. With such a halo around him, it is inevitable that there will be people who will be jealous and frame him. Those false accusations have no basis at all. Without evidence, how can the officials and the common people be convinced? If you can't convince the people and act rashly against Prince Zhongshuan, I'm afraid there will only be rumors outside that Your Majesty is afraid of the meritorious officials. Your Majesty is a wise ruler. Naturally, he won't do such a thing. However, there are many foolish people among the common people. If they say so, won't Your Majesty be unable to defend himself? This subject is thinking for Your Majesty. This matter must be considered at length. These people spilled beans at an extremely fast speed, and every word they said was reasonable. Li Qitian inwardly mocked them. Was this the loyalty of these people to the emperor and their country? Yet at this critical moment, these people's hearts were all on the side of an outsider. Li Qitian's heart was now much more at ease. He wanted to solve all the problems one by one. It was fine as long as he could take down Pang Xiao today. Seeing that Li Qitian was deep in thought and not speaking, the officials began to quarrel again. Li Qitian's head hurt from the noise. Just as he was about to speak, he saw that the young man who had disguised himself as a young eunuch had returned. This time, his footsteps were even more hurried than before. When he arrived in front of him, he lowered his voice and said, "Your Majesty, we just received news that Prince Consort Ji has been placed under house arrest in the barracks by several commanders of the Tiger Army." Li Qitian's eyes suddenly widened. Because the string of beads in his hand had already fallen, he could only clench his fists tightly. He didn't even care that his fingernails had left a few scratches on his palms. Li Qitian had been warning himself to not panic and to remain calm. He must remain calm. He must not let others see that there was a problem here. However, Ji Ziyu had been placed under house arrest by the commanders of the Tiger Army. He couldn't come to fight against Pang Xiao. If today's matter angered Pang Xiao, he would be barbaric and start a massacre. He was afraid that his bodyguards wouldn't be able to last more than 10 rounds against Pang Xiao. What if Pang Xiao had the idea of killing the emperor in a fit of anger? Li Qitian felt that if he forced Pang Xiao into a corner, with his temperament, he might really risk it all. Li Qitian's heart was still burning with anxiety and frustration. Where did Ji Ziyu go wrong? The Liu family was causing trouble for him again. He suppressed his anger and invited Pang Xiao into the trap because he wanted to get rid of all future troubles. But now, in front of all the civil and military officials, was he really going to make a fool of himself? At this time, the officials below began to argue again. Li Qitian's head buzzed as he listened. He was on the verge of exploding. At this time, Pang Xiao stood up again and coldly reprimanded those who were arguing. Enough, this is the Political Harmony Palace, Your Majesty's court meeting. It's fine if you all have your own opinions, but why is there no end to it? This king followed Your Majesty on the battlefield in the past and went through fire and water together. That was a relationship where you could trust each other's backs. This king's wife went missing. As his sworn brother, Your Majesty kept persuading this king to return to the capital. This king refused. That's also a relationship between me and my sworn brother. How is it that I'm plotting a rebellion when it comes to you? Could it be that with your false accusations and instigation, you think that the emperor will convict this prince of my crimes? You said this king killed the innocent? What a joke. This king asks you, which war doesn't kill people? Is the brain of the person who said this filled with shit and urine? You said this king humiliated the old officials of Northern G. Ask the old officials of Northern G here, when did this king humiliate them? You said this king embezzled money and provisions. You're even more arrogant. When I first took over Northern G's treasury, to put it bluntly, the incapable ruler of Northern G could starve all the rats in the treasury to suicide. You said I embezzled the heir. You said I snatched the daughter of an official. My marriage to the Qin clan was bestowed by your majesty. How is that snatching? I left the capital to search for treasures because I was ordered to provide disaster relief. On the way, I searched for treasures for your majesty. You said I embezzled money from the disaster? That's the biggest joke in the world. My wife's dowry and my money have been donated. Otherwise, the people of the old Dian would have rebelled out of hunger. How could I allow a bunch of vermin like you to criticize me in the capital? You said I was jealous of my colleagues. At this point, Pang Xiao suddenly burst into laughter. He pointed at the officials and said domineeringly, to be honest, all of you are here to compete with this king. This king wants all of you to come at him together. What do you have that is worthy of this king's jealousy? This king has private soldiers. Let me ask you. As a prince, you have 50 soldiers. Is that overstepping the limit? Pang Xiao stepped in front of Imperial Censor Gu. Imperial Censor Gu is a learned man. Tell me, as a prince personally appointed by your majesty, is it overstepping the limit to have 50 soldiers? Imperial Censor Gu took 2 steps back after hearing Pang Xiao's words. He was so scared that his whole body was trembling. Pang Xiao finally said, as for being unfilial to my official mother, there is one thing I have to say now. Pang Xiao turned to Li Qitian and saluted. Your Majesty took pity on my life and helped me find my surviving official mother. I am grateful. But after contact and investigation, I found that the official mother your Majesty found was actually a fake. Li Qitian's eyebrows twitched. Pang Xiao said, I know your Majesty's good intentions. I didn't want to make things difficult for your Majesty, so I sent the fake Madame Pang out. In fact, I plan to keep this matter to myself for the rest of my life. I will never say it out loud. There is such a thing. That vicious woman deceived me for glory and wealth. Li Qitian was unable to restrain his anger and stood up. Pang Xiao said, Your Majesty, don't be angry. It is not your fault. That woman was too greedy. She wanted to deceive your Majesty because she knew something about the past. That is the crime of deceiving your Majesty. It is unforgivable. Li Qitian was furious. He immediately said, Arrest that woman and behead her tomorrow afternoon. Chapter 567. The civil and military officials in the court were not fools. If they still couldn't see through your Majesty's intentions, then they would be wasting their time as court officials. Hearing your Majesty say this, many people began to chime in. The imperial censors who followed Imperial Censor Gu in impeaching Pang Xiao all had ashen faces. They felt that their lives were about to be forfeited today. As expected, Li Qitian said in a deep voice, As subjects, not only did you not share my burdens and solve my problems, it's fine if I don't blame you for your incompetence, but you actually dared to frame a loyal subject in front of me. If I were to believe your slanderous words today, wouldn't I become an incapable ruler who framed his subjects? What are you trying to do to me? These people should all be severely punished. Li Qitian's anger was completely released at this moment. This was because the Li Qitian in his impression had never been this angry before. How could an ordinary person withstand the majesty of an emperor? Everyone was afraid that they would be implicated. Even the officials who had maintained a neutral stance on this matter were shocked by your Majesty's anger. Not to mention Imperial Censor Gu and the others who were trembling on the ground. Seeing that Li Qitian intended to push the blame onto others and remove himself from the blame, Peng Shao immediately bowed and said, "Your Majesty, please calm down." The Imperial Censor's accusations were like this. They found a problem and wanted to impeach, but that was because they were doing their duty. Today, they impeached Yu Qin because someone had caused this misunderstanding behind their backs. They did their job diligently. Although they were fooled, they didn't do anything wrong. "Your Majesty, please calm down." Many of the officials were very surprised. They originally thought that with Peng Zhao's domineering personality, he wouldn't let go of an opportunity to take revenge. Who would have thought that the murderous Wang Yi would have a soft heart and speak on behalf of the people who had just impeached him? However, those who understood the situation clearly knew that Peng Zhao was not being benevolent and generous. It was clear that he wanted to let those imperial censors feel the difference in the way Li Qitian treated them. If it wasn't for Your Majesty's instructions, the imperial censors would probably never impeach Peng Zhao for the rest of their lives. They listened to Your Majesty's orders, but in the end, they were ordered by Your Majesty to be severely punished, and the one who pleaded for them was the one who was impeached by them. Such a contrast could be seen clearly by outsiders, but the people involved must be even more clear about it. Li Qitian also had the same feeling in his heart. He secretly hated Peng Zhao for pretending to be a good person. But he could only suffer in silence. None of his deployments worked. Now, he was afraid that Peng Zhao would explode on the spot and cause an uncontrollable situation. So, regardless of whether he could tolerate it or not, he could only tolerate it. Li Qitian muttered to himself and sighed, "Forget it. We'll do as Prince Zhongshuan says." However, all of you must remember that in the future, you are not allowed to sow discord between me and the other officials for no reason. Our Dezhou dynasty has just been established for 4 years. What we need is for all of you to work together for the welfare of the people, not for internal strife. We must learn from the lesson of Beiji. If it wasn't for the fact that the officials of Beiji were not united and the corruption and extravagance were serious, the people wouldn't have been so angry in the end. We should also learn from the lessons of the Northern Ji Kingdom. When the officials heard this, they all bowed. Your Majesty is wise. Li Qitian saw that the situation had stabilized and could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Peng Zhao was not angered to the point where he could not control himself. Once he went berserk, the consequences would be even more difficult to control. However, when Li Qitian thought of Ji Ziyu, who was under house arrest in the Tiger Army's barracks, he felt a wave of anger and suspicion. Ji Ziyu was not an incompetent person. Otherwise, he would not have been able to dominate the north and make the Taitan tremble when they heard Ji Ziyu's name. A few days ago, he had specially asked Li Guanwen to probe Ji Ziyu. At that time, Ji Ziyu had a good grasp of the Tiger Army situation. Why did he fail at such a crucial moment? Now, if anyone told Li Qitian that Ji Ziyu's situation was not intentional, he would not believe it. Li Qitian's thoughts flashed through his mind. He had already made up his mind to severely punish Ji Ziyu. Ji Ziyu ruined his plans and made him lose face. How could he let him go? Li Qitian remembered that he had asked Qin Yining a question just now. This was the best time to change the topic, so he said, "Prince Zhongshuan, continue to answer my question just now." Qin Yining saw the entire process. Just a few people who came to Li Qitian to answer Li Qitian's questions completely changed his attitude. She understood that Peng Zhao must have made some preparations behind the scenes. Now that Li Qitian had changed the topic, she knew that the crisis had been resolved. Qin Yining was overjoyed and sighed with emotion at Peng Zhao's power. However, her expression was calm as she bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I was not the one who killed Nari Khan that day. The one who really killed Nari Khan is the current Wu Tijin Khan. Qin Yining concealed the existence of Mu Jinghu and did not mention Lu Heng. He only gave a general description of the situation that day. Later, I only knocked the Khan of Anari unconscious. I didn't expect that after Wu Tijin Khan brought his trusted aides, he would kill his first wife. In the end, he even used Anari Khan's death to arouse the sympathy of the people. When I was hiding in Taden, the Taden people were full of praise for Wu Tijin Khan's vow to avenge Anari. As long as he said that he wanted to avenge Anari Khan, even a 10-year-old child would want to fight on the battlefield. Their people are hot-blooded and valiant, which is different from our Dezhou. Wu Tijin Khan very cleverly controlled their emotions and thoughts. Qin Yining's voice drifted over and explained the situation clearly. The civil and military officials in the court fell into deep thought. It seems that we have underestimated Wu Tijin Khan's shamelessness. Li Qitian gritted his teeth and said, "This Wu Tijin Khan helped Anari ascend to the position of Queen Regent, and then slowly supported her to become Khan. I'm afraid that he did it so that he could legitimately obtain the position of Khan from her, the rightful heir of the royal family, and gain the recognition of the people. His scheming is deep and shameless, it's simply outrageous." When the officials heard this, they all agreed and condemned Wu Tijin Khan's shamelessness. After a while, someone stood up and said, "It seems that Prince Zhongshuan's wife was kidnapped at Taden on the way back from the disaster relief. Even if Taden wants to go to war now, it's not because of Prince Zhongshuan's wife. The princess is really innocent in this matter." Exactly. As a woman, the princess was able to maintain her strength of character in Taden and did not do anything to harm Dezhou. She was also able to maintain her chastity until we rescued her. Her temperament and willpower are worthy of being studied by the women of Dezhou. When someone said this, everyone saw that Li Qitian had no intention of refuting, so they all agreed. Qin Yining lowered his eyes and did not make a sound. Pang Xiao, Qin Huaiyuan, and Qin Xiuyuan also did not make a sound. They looked as if they were completely at your Majesty's command. Li Qitian smiled and nodded repeatedly, but in his heart, he was so angry that he almost spat out a mouthful of old blood. What did these people mean? What? His plan did not succeed and he did not capture Pang Xiao, but why did they want him to reward his wife? A woman was kidnapped to Taden. Who knew if she was still chaste or not? These people praised her chastity, but he had no way to refute at this juncture. These people were definitely ordered by Pang Xiao. Li Qitian gritted his teeth so hard that they almost broke. But he could only swallow this loss. Everyone is right. Prince Zhongshuan's consort is indeed a heroine. Li Qitian smiled and said, "The Qin clan listens to the title. This subject's wife is here." Qin Yining bowed gracefully. Prince Zhongshuan's consort is from the Qin clan. She is intelligent, virtuous, and virtuous. She can be called the model of a woman. Today, she is specially conferred the title of a superior first-rank noble lady. She is also bestowed with 100 taels of gold and a number of silk, satin, and treasures. Qin Yining hurriedly bowed deeply. "This subject's wife thanks your Majesty for his great kindness." Li Qitian laughed and said, "Forget it. Quickly get up. Your body is heavy now. Be careful not to bump into my silly younger brother when you kneel." These words made it seem as if Pang Xiao liked to find trouble with him as his sworn younger brother. Pang Xiao smiled and pulled Qin Yining up. He bowed respectfully to Li Qitian and said, "Many thanks to your Majesty. This subject is also an adult now. I won't always go to your house to make trouble like before." Li Qitian's reply was neither light nor heavy. It meant that Li Qitian was talking about his childhood. This reply caused many people to ponder. Today's scene was clear to everyone. It was obvious that Li Qitian wanted to take down Pang Xiao. The reason was that his military service was too high to shock the emperor. However, Pang Xiao's military service was real. They were sworn brothers, and they had a friendship when they were young. As the emperor, he actually had no tolerance and was so eager to eliminate a meritorious subject. It was really chilling. Some people thought of this, and naturally, some people didn't think of it. They even smiled and felt that this was echoing the friendship between Your Majesty and Prince Zhongshuan. Li Qitian felt sick in his heart. Seeing that he couldn't get any benefits today, he became more and more bored. Soon, he announced that the court was dismissed. After spending so much effort, not only did he fail to take down Pang Xiao, but Pang Xiao's wife also gave him the title of a first-class noble lady, 100 taels of gold, and a lot of treasures. This made his heart ache more than if Li Qitian's heart had been dug out. However, he couldn't show it and could only endure. The Jingji guards and the 5 cities' warden's office prepared in the city were mobilized in vain. They didn't receive any follow-up orders and returned to their positions. Qin Huaiyuan and Qin Xiuyuan left the palace. They didn't dare to talk about today's matter, nor did they dare to make any unnecessary expressions. They hurriedly returned to Qin Manor. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao left the palace together and got on the carriage. When they left the Meridian Gate and were farther and farther away from the imperial palace, they began to hear the voices of the common people. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining looked at each other and smiled in tacit understanding. Wang Yi can foresee things like a god. What did he do? Why don't you tell this concubine? Chapter 568. Qin Yining said in surprise, "These things, the Tiger Army putting Prince Consort Ji under house arrest, and the Liu family changing hands and cutting off the food supplies, were these all your arrangements?" "Of course not." Pang Xiao smiled and said, "These are actually the spontaneous actions of Ji Lan and Liu Heng. I just used a little trick to make these things explode in one day. This matter is just calm on the surface now, but Your Majesty will definitely investigate thoroughly after the court. Even if I didn't do anything, he will think of a way to accuse me of several crimes. If I really did control these things, won't Your Majesty go crazy?" Thinking of Li Qitian's angry look just now, Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh again. He tapped Pang Xiao's shoulder and said, "You're too bad. With all these things put together, it's easy to guess that someone did it. But you didn't do anything, so he can't accuse you of any crimes. Isn't this driving him to death?" Pang Xiao shrugged helplessly and spread out his hands, with a look that said, "What can I do? I'm also very helpless." Qin Yining laughed again. Seeing that she didn't have any grudges and that today's matter didn't affect her health, Pang Xiao was completely relieved. Qin Yining leaned on Pang Xiao's shoulder, thought for a while, and said, "But after today's matter, you and Your Majesty are only separated by a thin layer of paper. Although Your Majesty has no choice but to endure it, once he finds the right time in the future, he will definitely make things difficult for you. When the time comes, you have to think about how to deal with it." Pang Xiao couldn't help but laugh when he saw her frown and nagging with concern. He rubbed his forehead against hers and said, "I know. I'll take care of it properly. Don't worry. The most important thing for you now is to take care of your body. You don't have to think about anything else." Qin Yining stroked his flat stomach and nodded with a smile. "I got it." Qin Yining lifted the curtain and looked outside. He asked, "Where are we going now?" "I think father-in-law and uncle have already gone home. Let's go over now. You haven't seen mother-in-law for a long time." Qin Yining's eyes lit up. She smiled and nodded obediently. "Okay." After thinking for a while, she asked, "How are Grandpa, Grandma, and Mother now? When will they be back?" Pang Xiao smiled and said, "Don't worry, I've already made the proper arrangements. When the situation here stabilizes, it will be about time for them to visit their relatives." Qin Yining thought for a moment and couldn't help but laugh even more heartily. As long as she thought of Li Qitian's twisted face in the morning court meeting, she felt exceptionally happy. Pang Zhao's plan this time gave Qin Yining a big surprise. At first, she didn't ask about this matter because of her feelings and trust in him. She trusted him and gave him full authority. Now, it seemed that Pang Zhao really had the ability for her to rely on. Even if she didn't intervene, he could handle things properly one by one. He could even handle things more brilliantly than when she was involved. Qin Yining leaned on Pang Zhao's shoulder with peace of mind and discussed what to do after they went back. At the same time, in the imperial study, Li Qitian sat at the head of the table with a gloomy face. He hadn't said a word for a long time. The palace servants serving in the imperial study were all silent. They hated that they couldn't become invisible from now on. They didn't want Your Majesty to vent his anger on them. Li Guanwen lowered his eyes and stood far away by the ancient shelf made of black paulownia wood. He prayed thousands of times in his heart that Your Majesty wouldn't notice him. At this time, Li Qitian seemed to have recovered from his thoughts. He frowned and took a sip of tea. The tea in his mouth was a bit cold. He was furious. He raised his hand and smashed the teacup, shouting, "Who did this? What's the use of raising dogs like you? At this critical moment, you don't even know how to share my worries. You only make trouble for me. Can't you even make tea?" As soon as he heard Li Qitian's words, Li Guanwen knew that Your Majesty was still angry at Prince Consort Ji and was venting his anger on others. Normally, Li Qitian's tea was made by palace servants who were responsible for making tea. They would make sure that the temperature and thickness of the tea was suitable for drinking. But today, Li Qitian was furious. Who would dare to make tea in front of him for no reason? Wouldn't that be courting death? Because of this, Li Qitian drank the herbal tea. The palace maid who made the tea knelt down with a pale face. She didn't care about the broken porcelain on the floor and cut her knees and hands. She repeatedly kowtowed and said with a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This servant knows her mistake." As soon as Li Qitian heard the voice that belonged to a young girl, he became even angrier. He thought of the Qin Yining in the main hall from beginning to end. Her attitude was calm and leisurely. Now that he thought about it, for a woman to be so calm, wasn't it because she had a card up her sleeve? This was enough to prove that Pang Zhao had secretly arranged everything. These people were colluding with each other. Wasn't it just to bully him? The anger in Li Qitian's heart was like oil that had been spilled. It burned even more fiercely. He pointed at the palace maid who made the tea and said, "Drag this lowly servant out and flog her 100 times. Yes. The imperial bodyguards outside the hall immediately responded and entered. They dragged the palace maid who was so scared that she couldn't speak, one on the left and one on the right. When she was dragged out of the hall, the palace maid finally found her voice. Her mournful screams resounded through the sky. "Your Majesty, please spare my life. Your Majesty harassed this servant. This servant doesn't want to die. This servant doesn't want to die. Your Majesty." That mournful screams made people's hair stand on end. Seeing that Li Qitian's brows were furrowed even tighter, Li Guanwen hurriedly followed him out. He gestured to the imperial bodyguards and said in a low voice, "Why aren't you sealing her mouth? Wait until Your Majesty gets angry. Otherwise, we'll all lose our heads." "Yes." The imperial bodyguards hurriedly took out a handkerchief from their sleeves, crumpled it into a ball, and stuffed it into the palace maid's mouth. They pulled her far away to a corner and called for 2 little eunuchs who were in charge of administering punishment. She was beaten 100 times without mercy. After 20 to 30 beatings, her bones and tendons were broken. That palace maid was already vomiting blood, her eyes were bulging, and she was no longer breathing. After the 100 beatings, she was already sitting upright. The eunuchs covered their mouths and noses, resisting the urge to vomit, and went to fetch water to clean the floor. The unlucky palace maid was directly wrapped in a mat and thrown out. Regardless of what the bystanders thought, Li Qitian listened to the sound of the wooden planks, and the anger in his heart subsided a little. Smelling the faint smell of blood, he even felt his state of mind calm down a lot. He was able to calm down and think about what to do next. Seeing Li Qitian narrowing his eyes and pondering, Li Guanwen was so scared that he almost trembled into a ball. To be able to find peace in the midst of brutality and blood, this kind of person's heart was probably ruthless to a certain extent. In your Majesty's eyes, killing a palace maid was probably as insignificant as stepping on an ant. After a while, Li Qitian, who was deep in thought, finally opened his mouth. Li Guanwen. This servant is here. Li Guanwen immediately stepped forward and bowed, suppressing the panic and fear in his heart. What orders does your Majesty have? Immediately take Jin's decree and go to the Tiger Army. Order Jiziyu and the generals who put him under house arrest to enter the palace and say Jin's words. If they have any dissatisfaction, they can personally state it in front of Jin. Private conflicts are not what Jin wants to see. Li Guanwen heard this and let out a sigh of relief. But when he thought of the Tiger Army's camp that was probably in chaos, he felt his scalp go numb. If he went, he didn't know if he would lose his little life. Li Guanwen braced himself and bowed solemnly. Yes, this servant will do it immediately. Then, he went out to do as he was told without fear of death. Li Qitian rubbed his chin, pondering the intentions of those uncouth men in the Tiger Army. If this was really arranged by Pang Xiao, then he was afraid that what would happen next would be a mutiny. Li Qitian calmly issued several decrees, arranging for the Jingji Guard and the Warden's Office of the 5 cities to be on standby in the city today to be prepared. The people who received the decrees were at a loss for a moment. They had no idea what Your Majesty wanted them to be prepared for when he said to be prepared. Or rather, they had no idea what Your Majesty wanted them to do. In reality, if they could, they really wished that they weren't officials in the capital right now and were far away from this place of trouble. The people below were terrified. Li Qitian also tensed himself up like a bowstring. His hesitation and uneasiness continued until Jiziyu and the 6 Tiger Army generals of different ranks came to the palace hall together. When Li Guanwen saw Li Qitian, he felt as if he had survived a disaster. In reality, when he went to the Tiger Army's camp, Li Guanwen was already prepared to die. If things went wrong, his little life would be embroiled in the disputes in the army. If those generals really rebelled, killing him would be as easy as killing an ant. But he actually came back alive. Your Majesty. Li Guanwen suppressed his excitement and bowed. Li Qitian nodded from his seat at the head of the table. Then, he shifted his gaze to the 2 groups of people in front of him. Jiziyu stood on one side with a cold expression. The 6 Tiger Army generals and lieutenants who originally followed Pang Xiao stood on the other side. Both sides obviously didn't like each other. They were like angry fighting cocks. Even though they were right in front of Li Qitian in the imperial study, they still seemed to want to bite each other in order to feel at ease. Li Qitian said in a deep voice, "You actually dare to put the commander-in-chief under house arrest? Do you know your crime?" The 6 people immediately knelt on one knee and saluted with cupped fists. Your Majesty, please calm down. We know our crime. However, we also have our reasons. Li Qitian heard the buzzing of these rough men's voices in the imperial study. It was so loud that his head hurt. He pointed at the youngest general with a sullen face. You speak. Yes. Chapter 569. Theory. Ji Ziyu said coldly, "You're disobeying military orders. How dare you argue in front of your majesty? Although you're the temporary commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army, you don't understand the internal affairs of the Tiger Army. It's easy to cause the army's morale to drop. Since we've been trusted by your majesty and entrusted with important tasks, we should be loyal to your majesty. You're just a new official who wants to monopolize power. Now you have the nerve to talk about military orders. That's right, you just want to monopolize power. You don't care about the original structure of the Tiger Army and want to act recklessly. I don't know where you put the country's interests and your majesty's trust." The 6 of them opened their mouths and started a crusade against Ji Ziyu. Ji Ziyu wasn't the kind of person who was good with words. At this time, he might not be able to win an argument against 6 people, or he might be disdainful to argue with these people. He just stood there with a cold face and his hands behind his back. However, his face was getting darker and darker. It was obvious that he was on the verge of losing his patience. Li Qitian quietly let them argue. He took the opportunity to observe their expressions to determine if they were really arguing or if they had made an agreement. To be honest, although he trusted Ji Ziyu more, he didn't completely trust him. He was more or less suspicious and guarded against him. At the most critical time, he handed the task of taking down Pang Xiao to Ji Ziyu. However, Ji Ziyu created such a mess at the last minute and ruined his plans. How could Li Qitian not be suspicious? However, Li Qitian observed carefully for a long time and couldn't find any flaws. Ji Ziyu and the 6 uncouth men had indeed reached the point where they hated each other so much that they wanted to kill each other. Li Qitian felt that if he wasn't in charge now, they might have drawn their swords on the spot. Since Ji Ziyu wasn't colluding with the Tiger Army, there were 2 possibilities. Either the Tiger Army was instructed by Pang Xiao and chose to cause trouble at this time. Either Ji Ziyu's bad temper had caused public anger in the Tiger Army, and these people did not listen to him. Their anger had accumulated to a certain extent and exploded when Pang Xiao returned. While Li Qitian was deep in thought, the atmosphere between Ji Ziyu and the 6 men had become so tense that they were about to start fighting. Li Qitian didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He didn't want to see them make trouble under his watch, so he said, "Everyone, shut up." Li Qitian's voice was neither loud nor soft, but it was an imperial edict. Everyone obeyed the order and kept quiet. They also realized that they had gone overboard in arguing in the imperial study and lowered their heads. Li Qitian sneered and said, "How dare you? You dare to be so arrogant in my imperial study? Don't tell me you want to rebel. We know our mistake. Your Majesty, please forgive us." The 7 men knelt down and bowed. Li Qitian reprimanded, "No matter what Ji Lan's orders are, he is the commander-in-chief that I have personally chosen. Even if I trust his ability to lead troops, I intend to hand over all matters in the Tiger Army to him. You can only listen to military orders. Do you understand?" The 6 men were speechless for a moment. After a while, they replied, "Yes." Li Qitian looked at the 6 men and thought for a while. He was sure that they were all capable subordinates by Pang Xiao's side. He was overjoyed. It was such a good opportunity. If he could seize the right time to take them all down, wouldn't Pang Xiao lose 6 of his subordinates in the army all of a sudden? Thinking of this, Li Qitian was so excited in his letter that he almost announced the order to kill the 6 men. But after thinking about it, although the 6 of them weren't as famous as Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu, they were still generals who had served the imperial court for many years. If he killed them all at once and insisted that they were plotting a rebellion by imprisoning the commander-in-chief, it was possible. However, this kind of statement would easily arouse suspicion from the outside world. Having just experienced Pang Xiao's incident, Li Qitian couldn't bear the gossip of the outside world. Thinking of this, Li Qitian said, "You imprisoned the commander-in-chief and disobeyed the imperial edict. Your crimes are punishable by death." The 6 men's faces immediately turned pale. However, none of them panicked. They all lowered their heads and waited for Li Qitian's next order. Li Qitian saw that these men were so calm and felt a bit of panic in his heart. Could it be that they really did this because they listened to Pang Zhao's orders? Did they have something to rely on and believe that he wouldn't kill them? Li Qitian's hands tightly gripped the armrests of his chair. He really wanted to kill these people to vent his anger. However, when he remembered that his reputation was the most important, he finally forced himself to restrain himself. "However, seeing that you have been loyal to the country for many years and have shed blood and tears on the battlefield, we won't bicker with you. However, you can avoid the death penalty, but you can't escape punishment." "Guards." "Yes." Suddenly, 20 to 30 imperial bodyguards rushed in from outside. Each of them looked nervous and ready for battle. Li Qitian raised his voice and said, "Strip these 6 men of their official robes and flog them 20 times each. After that, send them back to the mansion and strip them of all their official positions. They will never be employed again." "As you command." The imperial bodyguards immediately stepped forward. The 6 men didn't say a word as they were stripped of their official robes. They were dragged outside and given a beating. After that, the eunuchs were arranged to send them back. When the 6 men were being flogged, Li Qitian didn't let Ji Ziyu get up. He just stared at him silently. Ji Ziyu's face was as indifferent as usual. After listening to the sound of the execution, he expressionlessly raised his eyes and met Li Qitian's gaze. Li Qitian met those emotionless eyes and said in a low voice, "Ji Lan, you have disappointed us." Ji Ziyu lowered his head and pursed his bright red lips. His long eyelashes cast 2 shadows on his face. Li Qitian continued, "You have been a commander of the Dragon Legion for many years. We don't believe that you have the ability to let things develop to this state." After saying this, Li Qitian stood up and walked to Ji Ziyu step by step. He lowered his head and looked at Ji Ziyu's upright posture as he knelt. The anger that he had suppressed exploded once again. Li Qitian kicked Ji Ziyu's shoulder. Ji Ziyu didn't dodge and was kicked to the ground. "Ji Lan. You dare say that you didn't do this on purpose? You know how important today's matter is to the imperial court. It was clearly the best opportunity to get rid of the hidden danger in one fell swoop. But because of your inaction, all of our arrangements were in vain. You have made us the laughingstock of the people in the imperial court." Ji Ziyu got up and knelt again. His voice was as cold as usual, and his emotions didn't fluctuate. "This subject did this for your majesty." When Li Qitian heard this, his anger once again soared to a new height. Chapter 570. Ji Ziyu said calmly, "Your Majesty's statement." "You? What kind of attitude is that?" Li Qitian flew into a rage and kicked Ji Ziyu again. Ji Ziyu was kicked so hard that he fell to the ground again. His handsome face was still expressionless. "During this period of time, we have treated you as if we were of the same mind. We have promoted you and entrusted you with important tasks. We have treated you well, but what about you? Is this how you repay our trust?" Just like that, he allowed Li Qitian to vent his emotions. He scolded and kicked Li Qitian several times. Finally, Li Qitian was so tired that he put his hands on his hips and panted heavily. Ji Ziyu knelt properly and said, "Your Majesty, the reason this subject is doing this is indeed for your Majesty's sake." Li Qitian pointed at Ji Ziyu and nodded angrily. "Fine, then tell us why you are doing this. If what you say is reasonable, then we will forget about this matter. If you argue, do you really think we can only have you?" Ji Ziyu lowered his head and said, "This subject does not think that way. Dezhou is full of talented people. Your Majesty has the support of the people. How can you only have this subject? This subject is doing this for two reasons. First, the current situation in the imperial court is not suitable to take down Pang Zhishi. Tayton is eyeing us covetously. External threats are coming, so how can we deal with internal problems? First, we should work together to resist external threats. Once everything is stable, we can close our doors and resolve our internal problems. Second, although the Tiger Army is under my command, those people were once Pang Zhishi's men. If there is a need to take action one day, they will always be a hidden danger. Why don't we take this opportunity to stabilize Pang Zhishi and give Your Majesty a legitimate reason to replace Pang Zhishi's men in important positions? Isn't this killing two birds with one stone? Ji Ziyu was usually not good with words. He rarely spoke so much in one breath. It was rare for him to speak, so Li Qitian listened very carefully. After kicking Ji Ziyu so many times without him making a sound, Li Qitian's anger had already subsided a lot. Now that he listened to Ji Ziyu's analysis of the reason, Li Qitian carefully pondered over it and couldn't help but feel a little bit of agreement. Today's failure in the imperial court had made Li Qitian realize that he had indeed acted too hastily this time. Not only did he fail to take down Pang Shao in one fell swoop, but he had also caused an extremely negative impact on his reputation outside. He had also acted rashly and alerted the enemy, which had intensified the conflict between the two of them. Now, he was only left with a thin layer of skin to maintain his dignity. If Pang Shao were to lead the troops to rebel now, he would be able to find an excuse. Pang Zhao's reputation had always been very high among the people, and his appeal in the military was even more unmatched. Tayton was now doing his best to invade the south, and had already expressed his desire to invade the south. If at this time, Pang Shao was forced to rebel against Dezhou and join forces with Eugene Khan to deal with Dezhou, when Li Qitian thought of this, he was already sweating profusely. He couldn't help but somewhat agree with Ji Ziyu's actions. At least now, the generals in the Tiger Army who were wholeheartedly loyal to Pang Shao had already successfully taken down 6 people. He could replace these 6 people with his own trusted subordinates. When the time came, the Tiger Army would completely break away from Pang Zhao's control. At least if he wanted to rebel, he would definitely choose the Tiger Army that he had led for many years. He definitely wouldn't be able to order the Dragon Army in the north. Ji Ziyu was originally the god of war that was revered by tens of thousands of people in the Dragon Army. Now that he had firm control over the Tiger Army, the military power of the world was already in the hands of his own people. When he took down Pang Shao in the future, if Ji Ziyu had any thoughts of betrayal, it would be easy to deal with him with only one person. It was better than constantly worrying that Pang Shao and Ji Ziyu would join forces to rebel against him. Thinking of this, Li Qitian sighed and used both hands to help Ji Ziyu up. Ji Ziyu seemed to have been injured by his kick. Half of his shoulder was stiff. Although his expression was normal and there wasn't anything wrong with his expression, Li Qitian could already tell that something was wrong from his movements. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Beloved subject, don't take offense. Zhen only acted this way because Zhen was angry. Ji Ziyu hurriedly bowed again. This subject understands Your Majesty's painstaking efforts. Please don't be like this. How could Li Qitian let him kneel again? He helped him up again and purposely avoided talking about court matters. He chatted with Ji Ziyu about domestic matters. In the end, he asked, Anyang hasn't come to the palace to pay respects to Imperial Mother these days. Imperial Mother even asked about it a few days ago. Ji Ziyu lowered his eyes and said, the Princess Royal hasn't asked this subject to see her either. However, there are many close attendants in the Princess Royal's residence. She should be having a good time. When Li Qitian heard this, he immediately understood. He knew how much his younger sister was spoiled. An Yang's personality was stubborn and spoiled. She was arrogant and self-centered. Although it was mostly political considerations that allowed Ji Ziyu to marry her, from an outsider's point of view, they didn't match. In addition, ever since Ji Ziyu caught Li Helan fooling around with a male companion at Madame Lu's residence, Ji Ziyu seemed to have given up on this marriage. Li Helan was becoming more and more unscrupulous and began to raise male companions in the Princess Royal's residence. Li Qitian was busy with court matters. How could he have the time to consider everything for Li Helan? When the Empress saw that the Empress Dowager didn't care about these things, she naturally wouldn't interfere. So today, Li Helan's reputation for being dissolute had become a secret that everyone knew. Li Qitian said awkwardly, "Forget it. If you like it, Jin will send you a few gentle and pleasant palace attendants to serve you. Jin will talk to An Yang about her." Ji Ziyu heard this and quickly bowed, "Thank you for your Majesty's concern. This subject has no intention of doing this." As the emperor, he wanted to arrange beauties to be by his son-in-law's side. This was really surprising. Normally, when a person married the emperor, they would only ask that he not take concubines and could only wait for the princess to summon him. However, when it came to Li Qitian and Ji Ziyu, Li Qitian actually took the initiative to send a woman to Ji Ziyu. It was obvious how important Ji Ziyu was to Li Qitian. Ji Ziyu stayed in the palace and talked with Li Qitian for a while. Only then did Li Qitian say, "You did very well this time. You took the big picture into consideration. Jin will reward you with 100 taels of gold and a sword. I will send it to your son-in-law's residence later." Ji Ziyu lowered his eyes and kowtowed to express his gratitude. Li Qitian's extravagant bestowal of rewards would certainly have several meanings in other people's eyes. Those who stood on Pang Zhao's side would certainly think that Li Qitian had helped His Majesty do something shameful. But so what? Ji Ziyu's expression was still indifferent. He always did things based on his heart. As long as he felt that it was right, he didn't care about the other consequences. At this time in the Qin residence, Qin Yining saw the Sun clan. The mother and daughter pair stood in front of the gate and wept bitterly on each other's shoulders. The scene of the mother and daughter reuniting moved all the womenfolk present, except for the old madam and Qin Huaining. Qin Huaiyuan led Pang Xiao inside with second old master and third old master and ordered the servants to prepare dinner. Second old madam went forward to persuade her eldest sister-in-law, "Didn't Sister Yi come back safe and sound? Not only is she fine now, but she is also pregnant. Don't just cry in joy when you see your daughter and ignore Sister Yi's health." When Sun Clan heard this, she immediately nodded and held Qin Yining's hand, saying, "Right, right, right. Look at me, I actually forgot about this. Your father told me. How are you feeling now?" Qin Yining wiped her tears with her sleeve and said helplessly, "Mother, I'm fine." "Good, good. Then let's quickly go inside and talk." The whole family happily walked into the house. Qin Huaiyuan brought his brothers and nephews to the front hall to drink tea and talk with Pang Xiao. The womenfolk directly entered the inner residence and sat down in the front hall. Old Madam had been ill for a few days and lost a lot of weight. The wrinkles on her face seemed even deeper, and the corners of her eyes drooped into triangles, making her look even more mean. She still hadn't recovered from the shock. How did Qin Yining not only come back safe and sound after being kidnapped by the Taitan, but she was also pregnant? Old Madam looked at Qin Yining suspiciously, as if she wanted to see some clues from her belly that hadn't shown any signs of pregnancy. Was she really pregnant? Or was she too thin, so she was actually pregnant but couldn't find out? Was this child really Pang Zhao's? Thinking of this, Old Madam was frightened by her own thoughts. Pang Xiao was such a malefic person. If he knew that Qin Yining's child wasn't his, wouldn't he chop up the Qin family and feed them to the dogs? Thinking of this, old madam was so scared that her face immediately turned pale. Thinking of this, Qin Yining waved her hand and called her forward. Sister Yi, come here quickly. Grandmother wants to talk to you. If Qin Yining didn't know what dirty things old madam had done behind her back and wanted to push Miss Ba and Qin Huining to Pang Shao as concubines while she was away, she might be able to squeeze out a smile to old madam now. But old madam's way of doing things really made her bitterly disappointed. Because of her face and considering that Miss Ba wasn't that kind of girl with a bad nature, Qin Yining didn't ridicule her to her face. Instead, she looked at old madam with an expressionless face and slowly walked over unwillingly. She didn't sit next to old madam but stood to reply. Old madam. Looking at her indifferent appearance, the fire that was suppressed in old madam's heart sprang up. If it wasn't for this little wench, how could her eldest son, who had always been closest to her, have a falling out with her? Old madam was an elder, so she naturally had her own pride. She wanted to be close to Qin Huayuan, but her son seemed to hold a grudge against her. She couldn't take the initiative to curry favor with him. Now that she saw the culprit that caused the conflict between her and her eldest son, although old madam rationally told herself that this granddaughter was now a Wang Fei and not an ordinary girl, she still couldn't control her emotions, and the corners of her mouth twitched a little. Did it go smoothly this time? Did anything happen on the way? Qin Yining said faintly, old madam doesn't need to worry. Nothing happened. Granddaughter is fine. Oh, then why did I hear that your majesty was going to hold Wang Yi accountable during the court assembly? Old madam's tone was very gossipy. Chapter 571. Beyond the first rank. Old madam's heart was filled with jealousy. What hadn't she seen in the dying court in the past? Originally, she thought that after Dezhou, she could still count on her eldest son to shine again. But now, her eldest son was estranged from her. The title of nobility that she hadn't received yet was given to her by a married granddaughter. This was a Wang Fei and a title of nobility. Even old madam felt envious when she saw this. Not only was old madam envious, but Qin Huining, who was at the side, lowered her head. In fact, she was clenching her fists so hard that they almost broke. Everything that Qin Yining was enjoying now should be hers. In the past, she was the fourth miss of the family Qin. Everything that she had was taken away by Qin Yining's appearance. Now, one of them was living under someone else's roof in the family Qin, while the other was a Wang Fei. This difference between heaven and earth made Qin Huining feel even more frustrated that he couldn't catch up in this lifetime. He also felt resentful that everything that should have belonged to him had been taken away. For a moment, the scene was strangely quiet. Qin Yining saw old madam's expression and knew what she was thinking. Now, her waist was sore after standing for a long time, so she returned to the Sun Clan's side and sat down. Old madam saw that she hadn't asked her proper question and had actually left without permission, so her face fell. I haven't finished asking and you're leaving. Is this your good upbringing? Sun Clan. The Sun Clan, who was innocently named, rolled her eyes at old madam. She only cared about holding Qin Yining's hand and quietly asked about the situation outside. Old madam was so angry that her face turned purple in an instant. Qin Huining and Miss Ba hurriedly handed her tea and patted her back. Old madam took a sip of tea and calmed down. She pointed at the Sun Clan and Qin Yining and cursed, with this kind of upbringing, how can they raise a good child? In the future, could it be that they will also give birth to a good-for-nothing that can anger their mother to death? Just as she finished speaking, a deep male voice came from outside the door, sounding displeased. What's going on? The door curtain was lifted and Pang Shao walked in first. When he saw old madam's unkind expression that she didn't have time to retract, he only gave her a cold glance and made old Madam's words choked in her throat. She was so scared that she couldn't scold him even if she was beaten to death. I didn't expect that after Sister E returned home, she would provoke old Madam to this extent. She is truly unfilial. It's just that Sister E is this king's Wang Fei. Her mistake is naturally this king's fault. Let this king apologize to old Madam on behalf of Sister E. Pang Shao smiled and walked closer. He cupped his hands and bowed. Old Madam, you are the elder of the family. You are the most magnanimous. You only turn a blind eye to the younger generation's mistakes. You have to give us a chance to change, right? Pang Xiao's words were beautiful. He also apologized to old Madam with his status as a Qin Wang. He had already expressed enough respect and filial piety. Others all agreed with Pang Xiao in their hearts. Second old master and third old master nodded with a smile. They felt that this son-in-law was very good. He had a noble status and didn't put on airs. He was extremely filial and polite. But no one knew old Madam's suffering. She was almost scared to the point of peeing by Pang Xiao's sharp gaze that was like a knife. She finally understood. These people who led soldiers to war had a lot of blood on their hands. They were people who dared to chop people when they were unhappy. Although Pang Xiao was bowing to her, at the same time, he was warning her not to touch his bottom line. Old Madam was so scared that her face turned pale. She trembled like a sieve and cold sweat flowed down. Upon seeing this, Pang Xiao asked worriedly, "What's wrong with old Madam?" He looked at Qin Huayuan for help. "Father-in-law. Did I say something wrong?" Qin Huayuan sighed helplessly and said, "It's okay. Old Madam's health hasn't been very good recently. A few days ago, Sister E was lost. Old Madam was caught in a fire. Since then, she has suffered from 3 disasters and 8 disasters. She hasn't recovered until now. Now that she saw her granddaughter, she might be too excited." Such words restored old Madam's dignity. After all, old Madam was old and muddle-headed. She always did those disrespectful things and stuffed Miss 8 to Pang Xiao's side. Everyone, including Pang Xiao, was well aware of it. Saying such words was, after all, a son taking care of his mother's face. Pang Xiao immediately nodded and respectfully retreated to the side. He showed full respect to his father-in-law, Qin Huayuan. Old Madam took a deep breath and felt that she had lost face. She wanted to say a few more words to Qin Yining. But every time she looked over, Pang Xiao seemed to sense it and looked over with a faint smile. Old Madam was so scared that her heart trembled. She looked away to avoid Pang Xiao's sight. After a few times, old Madam didn't dare to show a provocative look. Qin Yining and the Sun clan saw all this. The Sun clan couldn't help but lower their heads to hold back their laughter. Qin Yining helplessly rolled his eyes at Pang Xiao. But there was no anger or lethality in that look. It was more like a kind of coquettish anger. Pang Xiao was tickled by that look. He was overjoyed and restrained his laughter a little. He didn't scare old Madam anymore. She was Qin Yining's biological grandmother. If others dared to treat his wife like this, he would have slapped them. Let's see who dared to be arrogant. Laoi, Laoi, there is a palace eunuch Laoi outside. He said that he came to deliver rewards to Grand Aunt. A manservant came to pass on the message with a smile outside the door. When everyone heard this, they were very happy and went to the front yard together. The eunuch who delivered the imperial edict read out the imperial edict conferring Qin Yining the title of first-rank noble lady. Then, he put away the gold, silk, head ornaments, and other rewards. After the whole family saw it happily and sent a big red envelope, the eunuch left with a smile. In the front yard, the whole family couldn't help but congratulate her again. Apart from being a concubine in the palace, this was probably the highest honor a woman could have in her life, right? Qin Yining wasn't even 20 years old, but she was already a first-rank noble lady. Not only was she a Wangfei, but she also had a husband who treated her so well and adored her. Now, she was even pregnant. It was as if she already had everything that women in the world envied. The whole family talked happily. The Sun clan held Qin Yining's hand and couldn't stop smiling. On the other hand, the Dowager Duchess was envious of the gold and silver. Second Madam even said, "Your Majesty thinks highly of son-in-law." He knew that he would return home first after court, so he sent the rewards over. Second Madam's words were originally meant to compliment Pang Xiao. However, Qin Huaiyuan and Pang Xiao understood that Li Qitian was monitoring them. By sending the gifts directly to Qin Yining's mansion, he was telling them that Your Majesty already knew that they were in close contact. Logically speaking, it was understandable that a father-in-law and son-in-law had a good relationship. However, Qin Huaiyuan and Pang Xiao, this father-in-law and son-in-law pair, were not ordinary people. Back then, they worked together to put on a show of discord before they succeeded in making Li Qitian personally grant Qin Yining and Pang Xiao a marriage. If Li Qitian knew that the two of them were like father and son when they were together, and that they often gave each other ideas and leaked some information, he would have long regretted it. But now, Li Qitian probably already knew. Because Qin Huaiyuan didn't do anything during the court assembly today and didn't help Li Qitian's faction play the Pang Xiao, Li Qitian should have already realized. Thinking of this, Pang Xiao couldn't help but look at Qin Huaiyuan worriedly. "Father-in-law." Qin Huaiyuan patted Pang Xiao's sturdy shoulder and said with a smile, "It's okay." His smile was indifferent, as if he didn't care at all. Seeing that Pang Xiao was still looking at him, he couldn't help but laugh. "I'm not young anymore. I've reached the age to play with my grandchildren." Qin Huaiyuan suddenly said this because he already had the intention to leave the world. Hearing this, Second Master and Second Madam were both worried. Qin Huaiyuan was now at the prime of his life, and he was also the Minister of Rights. It was only a matter of time before he entered the cabinet and became the Prime Minister. However, he had such thoughts, which was really puzzling and regretful. At this moment, the sound of hurried horse hooves came from outside the courtyard gate. Then, the gate opened, and a grey-robed eunuch came in. Seeing that everyone was present, he announced the decree. By the will of heaven, the emperor decrees that all men of the Qin clan who are officials in the court will be removed from their positions and will never be employed again. By the emperor. This sentence caused the originally lively courtyard to explode into silence. Except for Qin Huaiyuan, who still maintained his calm, everyone else was shocked speechless. Now, in addition to Qin Huaiyuan, Second Master Qin Shouyuan was also an official. Although Qin Yining's cousins hadn't yet become officials, they were all actively preparing to participate in the imperial examinations to seek an official career. This imperial decree was equivalent to completely cutting off all future prospects of the in-laws in the court. Although the imperial decree meant that Qin Huaiyuan and Qin Shouyuan were removed from their positions as officials and that they would never be employed again, it didn't include Qin Han, Qin Yu, and the others. However, once this started, who would dare to promote people surnamed Qin? Qin Huaiyuan calmly received the decree and thanked the emperor. Qin Shouyuan was also stunned for a moment before he thanked the emperor and received the decree. In the silence, old Madam suddenly burst into tears. "Mommy. How could it be like this? How could it be like this? Didn't Your Majesty bestow the title of noble lady to our family's great aunt? How could you turn around and remove her father from his position? What's going on?" Old Madam shouted out the question in everyone's heart. However, questioning the imperial decree was a serious crime. Second Madam and Mammy Qin immediately tacitly covered Old Madam's mouth. The eunuch who delivered the decree originally wanted to reprimand, but when he saw Pang Shao standing with his hands behind his back, he immediately swallowed his words in fear. Who dared to provoke this person? If things went wrong, he would be killed on the spot. He dared to guarantee that Your Majesty would only say, "Well done," when he heard about it later. His death would be in vain. The eunuch didn't dare to stay here any longer and didn't want to hear anything that shouldn't be heard. He immediately took his leave. His attitude was much more polite than when he entered the door. Pang Shao ordered people to send the eunuch away. Everyone returned to the main room again. At this time, no one covered old madam's mouth, so she began to cry. What a sin! How could it be like this? The son I raised for so many years was actually removed from his position. Sister Yi clearly got a reward just a moment ago, but in the next moment, Brother Meng and Brother Xiao were removed from their positions. How could this be good? Ah! In the future, how can our Qin clan continue to be glorious? When old madam cried, second madam's eyes also turned red. The members of the Sun clan were stunned and held Qin Yining's hand in a daze. Chapter 572. Second master recovered from his stupor and hurriedly shook his head. Big brother, what are you saying? We are a family. In the past, when I was basking in your glory, I didn't even thank you. At this time, Big Brother should apologize first. Thunder and rain are all His Majesty's grace. How can we, the subjects, control what Your Majesty wants to do? In the future, Big Brother is not allowed to say these words to Little Brother. It will make us estranged. That's right, Uncle. Big Uncle. Qin Yu also said, His Majesty's decree, we must obey it. Our family has experienced so much in Dian. It is already a blessing that we are able to reunite as a family. There is nothing bad about not being an official and not participating in court disputes. I think so too. Qin Han also persuaded, isn't it better for our family to gather together and live peacefully better than anything else? After experiencing those things in the past, we feel that all fame and fortune are fleeting clouds. As long as our family is still alive and living together, it is the greatest blessing. As for the other riches and honor, when they are glorious, it is like adding oil to a raging fire, but if someone wants to take it away, won't it be taken overnight? We have already seen through these things. The family Qin experienced that catastrophe in Dian and lost so many family members. Anyone with a little bit of heart would not be able to forget the pain of that time. Although there were not many people who were as open-minded as Qin Han, after he mentioned it, they all felt the same. When Qin Huayuan heard this, he couldn't help but be moved. He held back his sour nose and nodded. In the end, it was because I did something wrong in court that caused Your Majesty's dissatisfaction. When the matriarch heard this, she was no longer in a hurry to cry. She pulled Qin Huayuan and asked, Brother Meng, tell me clearly. Why did Your Majesty remove you from your official position? What did you do wrong? You are already so old, but he still put you in an important position. You can even enter the pavilion and become a minister. Why is he suddenly not using you? Could it be? The matriarch looked at Qin Yining and asked suspiciously, why were you removed from your official position when Sister Yi came back? Is it because of Sister Yi? His brother and nephew didn't blame Qin Huayuan, but old madam didn't feel gratified that her children were in the same boat. Instead, she stood out to stir up trouble. Pang Shao was unhappy to see this, especially when old madam even dragged Qin Yining into this. However, before Pang Shao could say anything, the members of the Sun clan stood up and grabbed Qin Yining's hand. What you said doesn't make sense. Sister Yi is a womenfolk, and she received a reward from Your Majesty. All the womenfolk in the house didn't receive as much glory as she did. How can you blame her for the men's affairs? Old Madam is used to being the head of the family. She should also think about how to be harmonious with her children. Now that she's going, she's saying such words. It's really displeasing. Upon hearing this, Old Madam flew into a rage. She didn't care who was present at the scene and pointed at the Sun clan. You still have the face to speak. It's all because of you, stupid woman. My brother Meng was so talented in the past. He was the wise Panin. He was appreciated wherever he went. When he first came to Dezhou, he was valued by your majesty. It's all because of you. It's all because of you. If it weren't for you, stupid woman, would Brother Meng have lost his official career? After scolding without reason, Old Madam beat her chest and stamped her feet as she burst into tears. She also observed the expressions of the people around her through her tears. When she saw that Qin Huaiyuan didn't have the slightest intention of comforting her, she cried even more bitterly. It wasn't easy for me to nurture my son. Now, he has lost his official career. I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to live anymore. Old Madam cried until Qin Yining's head hurt. Her brows also furrowed into a knot. As an outsider, Peng Shao couldn't reprimand the mother of his father-in-law, whom he had always respected. Moreover, Qin Huaiyuan was indeed implicated by him in this matter. Li Qitian's scheme failed today, so he would definitely vent his anger on everyone. He didn't see Qin Huaiyuan bring people to impeach him in the imperial court. He must have already developed resentment in his heart. As for Ji Ziyu, he still didn't know how Li Qitian would deal with him. When Pang Shao thought of this, his handsome face, which had been hiding his worry, almost couldn't hide his emotions anymore. Second Furin and Second Old Master went to persuade Old Madam. The Sun clan member pulled Qin Yining's hand and said, "It's too noisy. It's not good for your health. Let's go out first." When Qin Yining heard this, he blushed with shame. He couldn't help but observe Qin Huaiyuan's expression. Seeing that his father didn't change his expression and didn't seem to care, he was slightly relieved. Qin Yining followed the Sun clan member out of the main hall. Old Madam's cries were very penetrating. Even if they were standing in front of the courtyard door, they could still hear it clearly. The Sun clan member said in a low voice, "In the past, when our family was rich, I didn't see her being grateful. Now that your father has been removed from his position, your second uncle and third uncle haven't said anything yet, but she made a fuss first. She's also a mother." Qin Yining hugged the Sun clan member's arm and comforted her. "Mother, don't say these words in front of father. Don't say it in front of father, lest he be sad." The Sun clan member nodded and sighed. "Sister Yi, don't take these trivial matters to heart. You're now a person with two bodies. Just focus on taking care of your body. Look at how much weight you've lost on this trip. Your complexion also doesn't look good." Qin Yining's body was nourished by Pang Shao along the way. If it wasn't for this, when the Sun clan member saw Qin Yining in the desert, he didn't know how distressed they would be and how much they would cry. In the room, Old Madam's cries gradually weakened. Pang Shao lifted the warm curtain and came out first. Qin Huaiyuan, Second Old Master, Third Old Master, Qin Han, and Qin Yu all came out later. Second Old Mistress, Han Second Young Mistress, Eighth Young Mistress, Qin Huaining, and the other womenfolk stayed in the room to persuade and comfort Old Madam. Qin Huaiyuan said, "Now that your majesty is suspicious, it won't be easy to change this impression in the future. Rather than being timid, it's better to live a carefree life and be yourself." Second Old Master also nodded. Today's Imperial Court Assembly shenanigans could be understood just by thinking about it. Your Majesty wasn't able to take down Pang Shao and still had to pretend to be magnanimous on the surface to reward Qin Yining. In his heart, he was suppressing a burst of anger. Naturally, he would think of ways to vent his anger. That's why he used the man of his in-laws' family as an example. They should rejoice that Li Qitian was still considered clear-headed. If he was involved with someone like the previous incapable ruler of the Dian dynasty, it was possible that he would directly issue an edict to confiscate the family's property and exterminate the family. They could be considered to have escaped a calamity. Second Old Master then asked, "What plans does eldest brother have for the future?" Qin Huaiyuan sighed softly, "Actually, I've long been physically and mentally exhausted. I only have this one daughter. In the future, I can only hope to hold a grandson. I don't want to care about other things. Now that your Majesty has already classified me and son-in-law as the same party, no matter what I do, your Majesty's suspicion won't change. Why should I force myself to do anything? It's better to live a bit more freely." Speaking to hear, Qin Huaiyuan looked at Pang Shao with a smile and said, "Jishi, I don't know what you think about me and your mother-in-law moving to your Wangfu to live together." Third Old Master and Qin Yu had also thought of Qin Han's considerations. They could not be too selfish with other people's good intentions, so they both expressed their rejection. However, Qin Yining smiled and said, "There are indeed a few empty courtyards in the Wangfu. Second uncle, third uncle, and Gij, there's no need to be polite." He turned around and asked Pang Shao, "When the time comes, can you tidy up Snow Plum Courtyard and let our family live there?" Pang Shao smiled and nodded. "Of course." He then explained, "Snow Plum Courtyard is on the west side of the Wangfu. It's a separate courtyard with 3 entrances. It has a separate side door. If you want to leave the Wangfu and don't want to take a detour to go to the main entrance, you can also open the side door separately." Qin Yining said, "Snow Plum Courtyard is included in the Wangfu, but you can also close the walkway and open the side door to live alone. This way, our family can live closer, and it's also more convenient for Wang Yi to order people to protect us. When you want to move around, you can open the door on the walkway and casually visit the Wangfu. The degree of freedom is also high." Qin Huaiyuan listened to his daughter and son-in-law's arrangement and felt very satisfied. He turned around and asked Second Old Master and Third Old Master, "Second brother, third brother, what do you think?" Actually, Second Old Master and Third Old Master were already tempted. They looked at each other and then said, "Why don't we discuss it with Old Madam?" Qin Huaiyuan nodded and said, "I won't go in." "Second brother, why don't you go and talk to Mother?" Second Old Master nodded and sighed. "That's good." He hesitated for a moment and then advised, "Mother is in the middle of spring and autumn. It's inevitable that she's a bit muddle-headed. Normally, she's like an old child. Big brother, don't be sad. Mother actually loves you the most." Qin Huaiyuan smiled and said, "Of course I know. We're already at this age. How can we bicker with our old mother?" Second Old Master and Third Old Master saw Qin Huaiyuan's calm and indifferent smile and knew that he was an open-minded person. He really wouldn't bicker with these things. Thus, they felt relieved and went in to persuade him. When Old Madam first heard that Qin Huaiyuan wanted to move, she scolded Qin Huaiyuan on the spot for being an ungrateful wretch who forgot his mother after marrying a wife. However, when she heard that Pang Shao invited their whole family to move to the Wangfu, she was also a bit tempted. What kind of place was the Wangfu? If she refused, she was afraid that she wouldn't have the chance to enjoy life in the Wangfu in this lifetime. Besides, with her identity, she would be the oldest in the Wangfu. At that time, wouldn't everyone have to provide for her? Old Madam smiled through her tears and said somewhat proudly, "At least they still know how to be filial." Then, she asked with some worry, "What's the situation outside now? If we move, will we also get involved in some trouble? I always feel that this time, your eldest brother was dismissed from his official position by your Majesty. It has something to do with Sister Yi and her son-in-law." Old Madam's words made second Old Master and second Old Madam feel sick. Fortunately, the people from the eldest branch weren't here. Otherwise, they would be heartbroken if they met such a selfish person with good intentions and sincerity. Second Old Master said sternly, "Mother, you can't say these words again in the future. We are officials in the imperial court, so we have to look at heaven's prestige. Heaven's prestige is unpredictable, and we can't control our fortune and misfortune. Now, no one is to blame for this matter. If we want to blame someone, it's because we should have this period in our lives. Sister E is a filial child, and eldest brother is even more open-minded. He is also sincerely filial to mother. Don't say these kind of words to make people sad again. Otherwise, we will feel bitterly disappointed when we hear them." Second Old Madam also smiled and nodded, "Mother, don't lower yourself to the same level as us juniors." Old Master spoke frankly and had good intentions. "You are the most empathetic and magnanimous person. As the saying goes, a prime minister's magnanimity can support a boat. There's also another saying, if you are not stupid and deaf, you can't be a father. Mother is an elder, and we still need you to oversee us. Otherwise, we won't have a backbone in our lives." Second Old Master and second Old Madam, one played the good cop and the other played the bad cop, which made Old Madam lose her temper. Because of her daughter-in-law's words, she nodded and said, "All right, then our family will go and live there for the time being. If there's any situation, we will immediately move out. We will order people to look after this residence. When the time comes and we have to move back, we can live there." Second Old Madam nodded, but in her heart, she rolled her eyes. She really wanted to say that this residence also belonged to Sister E. When the family came, their belongings were all stolen by the bandits. How could they still have their own residence? Old Madam lived in 8 Sister Ye's residence, but she didn't know how to be grateful. Even she, the second aunt, felt embarrassed. Second Old Master went out to discuss with Qin Huayuan, Pang Xiao, and the others about moving. Once the matter was settled, it was easy to clean up. The thing that the Wangfu didn't lack the least was servants. When Pang Xiao's soldiers fought with the Jinghu Wei, each of them were like little tigers. When it came to moving, they were also capable of doing the work of 2 people. The Wangfu had all the furniture and bedding. The family only needed to bring their personal clothes and necessities. Therefore, everything was quickly organized. More than a dozen carriages were prepared. Some people were left behind to look after the residents, while the others brought their personal servants and went all the way to the Wangfu. There were always people looking after the snow plum courtyard. When Pang Xiao came back, he ordered the steward of the Wangfu to make arrangements. Old Madam followed the second branch and the third branch and moved into the snow plum courtyard. Pang Xiao ordered the steward to bring people to help. As for the other matters, they had to wait until they settled down. As for Qin Huayuan and the Sun clan, Qin Yining arranged for them to live in the Shui courtyard, where she had lived for a short time in the Wangfu. The environment here was quiet and elegant. Although there wasn't a separate gate leading to the outside of the Wangfu, it was in an important position in the Wangfu. It was very close to the study in the outer courtyard and could be separated from the inner courtyard. It was convenient to avoid arousing suspicion. After all, Qin Yining still had a single mother-in-law. As for Miss 8, she naturally lived with Old Madam. Qin Huining was Qin Huayuan's adopted daughter, so the Wangfu could only accept her. The Sun clan was afraid that Qin Huining would cause trouble, so they needed to keep an eye on her. Thus, they took the initiative to say, "Sister Hui will live here with me. You can go to Old Madam's place every day when you pay your respects." Qin Huining had long been fascinated by the Wangfu's large courtyard and elegant and luxurious scenery. The envy and jealousy she felt for Qin Yining was about to break through the sky. Seeing the Sun Clan guarding against her as if she was a thief, she felt even more wronged. However, she also wanted to repair the relationship with Qin Huayuan and the Sun Clan, so she obediently nodded and agreed. The Sun Clan first had the servant girls serve Qin Huayuan to the side room to rest. At this time, the sky was already dark. There were lamps in the room, so it was as bright as day. Qin Huayuan saw that Qin Yining was tired, so he said, "You are also tired. Quickly go and rest. We will talk about the rest tomorrow." He then said to Pang Xiao, "I have arranged for people to escort the in-laws back. I believe they will arrive tomorrow or the day after." When Pang Xiao heard this, he smiled and said, "Yes. Father Xiaoyu, during my absence, you helped me take care of my mother and maternal grandparents under your Majesty's surveillance. You must have put in a lot of effort. When we return, let's have a good drink." Hearing them say this, the Sun Clan was very surprised because she didn't know about these things. Pang Xiao took Qin Yining and left Su Shui Garden. The sky was already completely dark. There were servant girls in the front holding the lamps. Qin Yining's waist was a bit sore, so her steps were also slow. Seeing her like this, Pang Xiao simply picked her up horizontally. Qin Yining was caught off guard and cried out softly. She hurriedly hugged Pang Xiao's neck. "What are you doing? Quickly put me down. You are tired. Be good and rest for a while." I asked them to prepare some plain porridge and side dishes. You can rest after you go back and eat. Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh when she heard this. She rested her head on Pang Xiao's shoulder and felt his strong arms steadily supporting her. Their steps were light and without any bumps as they walked towards the upper courtyard. She was tired and didn't want to talk. Her heart was full of gratitude towards Pang Xiao's arrangements today, so she rubbed her cheek against his shoulder. Pang Xiao's heart melted. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. His tone was gentle as he said, "Good girl." Not long after, Pang Xiao stopped in his tracks. "Sister Yi, look." Qin Yining was already drowsy. When she heard this, she opened her eyes in a daze. "What's wrong?" Pang Xiao raised his chin. Qin Yining followed his gaze and saw a brand new plaque hanging high above the lintel of the upper courtyard under the warm yellow light of the lanterns. The familiar handwriting read, "Si Qing." Chapter 574. Pang Xiao nodded and looked lovingly at the person in his arms. "At first, I couldn't find you. You were in a terrible fix every day. All I wanted to do was to find you." Time passed quickly. Later, when I heard that you were in Tatar, my heart calmed down a little, and time slowed down. Father-in-law and I discussed it. At the time, it was not a good time to leave Jing to find you. I could only wait in the Fu. I was too lazy to pay attention to the matters of the court. When I was free, I would make some things. This plaque was made at the time. She hadn't thought that he had not just written the words, even the plaque had been made by him. Qin Yining smiled but her eyes became wet again. Pang Xiao saw the tears in her eyes. He felt both helpless and distressed. He carried her as they walked inside. "Why are you crying again?" He found that ever since Qin Yining became pregnant, she became emotional easily. Qin Yining was slightly embarrassed. But when she thought about how Pang Xiao had lived after she had disappeared, her heart became sore and distressed. If she was in his position, if she was Pang Xiao, she would have gone crazy with worry. The servant saw Pang Xiao come back with Wang Fei in his arms. They didn't dare to look. Everyone had smiles on their faces and went to lift the bamboo curtain for them. The room was already lit. The dim yellow silk lanterns caused the room to appear especially warm. Pang Xiao carefully placed Qin Yining on the bed with a soft mattress. He personally took off the pearl hairpins and earrings on her head, letting her slightly curly long hair fall behind her back. He squatted on the edge of the bed and took off her shoes and socks. His movements were gentle and affectionate. Qin Yining's hands were on the sides of her body as she looked with smiling eyes at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao occasionally raised his head and met Qin Yining's gaze. When he met her gentle eyes, he couldn't help but smile. After they got married, they were ordered to leave the capital before they could get used to living in their new house. Now that they were back home, Qin Yining could finally relax, but he still sighed in his heart. Grandpa, Grandma, and Mother will be back tomorrow, right? Qin Yining asked. Pang Xiao nodded and said, Father-in-law is very cautious. When I left the capital to look for you, I asked father-in-law to hide them. I was afraid that your majesty would vent his anger on them while I was away, so father-in-law secretly did it. He hid people, and even I couldn't find him. And every time I meet my father-in-law, I feel that whatever he says is reasonable, and I will listen to whatever he says. Although I know that father-in-law is right, I feel like I've been bewitched. It's very strange. Qin Yining chuckled. What's so strange about that? It's just that my father is a charming person. Pang Xiao nodded. Indeed. By the way, I saw that the two young ladies of your mansion also came. If they get together with old madam, it's inevitable that they will cause trouble. Why don't I pay attention to see if there are any suitable families? They are of the right age. It's good if you are willing to help. Qin Yining nodded with a smile. He was very touched that Pang Xiao was willing to help his family Qin think of all kinds of trifles. The two of them had a good night's sleep. With each other by their side, they felt at ease. In the afternoon of the next day, Qin Yining had just taken a nap on the warm couch after lunch when a maidservant came back and said, Princess, old master, old madam, and old madam are back. Qin Yining was overjoyed when he heard this. He hurriedly got up, but his head was still buzzing. His body swayed and was supported by the maidservant beside him. Princess, don't be anxious. Old madam and old madam must be going to Pine Crane Hall when they come back. Let me help you go to Pine Crane Hall first. Qin Yining was very heavy now, so he didn't dare to run at will. Otherwise, he would have rushed out. Hearing this, he could only nod and walk out slowly with the maidservant. After leaving Si Qin Garden, they went all the way to Pine Crane Hall along the long corridor. Along the way, all the servants in the mansion stopped to salute and respectfully called her Princess. Qin Yining had a light pink dress on his shoulder. He held the maidservant's waist with one hand and was protected by an old nanny who opened her arms like an old hen protecting her chicks. Behind them were 4 second-class maidservants. They hurried forward to greet her. Suddenly, they heard a conversation in front of them. Qin Yining looked up and saw the tall, slightly fat but vigorous Madame Ma and the beautiful Yao clan walking in the front. Pang Xiao and Yao Qinggu were walking behind, talking and laughing. Seeing Qin Yining, Madame Ma smiled and squinted her eyes. She left her daughter and walked quickly to Qin Yining. Good girl, let Grandma see you. Grandma. Qin Yining was about to kneel, but Madame Ma held her hands with both hands and didn't let her kneel. Don't do this. Our family doesn't like that. Good girl, you suffered outside. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. Let me tell you, Dai Fu, that brat, lost you. I've beaten him for you. Let's see if he dares to ignore you in the future. If he can lose his wife, what else can he do? As she spoke, she turned around and glared at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao stood to the side with Yao Qingdu. Both father and son had honest smiles on their faces. Yao clan smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Qin Yining turned around and bowed to Yao Qinggu and Yao clan respectively. Grandpa, Mom. Yao Qinggu smiled and nodded. Good, good. As long as you're fine, nothing else matters. Yes. Yao Shi also smiled. During this period of time, it was as if our Defu had lost its soul. Now that you've returned, everything is fine. Your maternal grandfather and grandmother both said that nothing else is important. The most important thing is that being safe is good fortune. A perfectly fine daughter has been married into our family. If something were to happen to you, we wouldn't know how to explain it to our in-laws. Qin Yining smiled and nodded, yes. But in her heart, she had already seen through their behavior. Madame Ma sincerely cared about her, welcomed her, and had no doubts about her. Yao Qinggu was shrewd. From his words, she could tell that he already had doubts about her, but he didn't like to show it on the surface. He only said, nothing else matters. This mother-in-law of the Yao clan must have deep doubts about her chastity. She didn't really care about her, but used some meaningless words to beat her. There was nothing wrong with her words, but when they were serialized, she felt suffocated for no reason. Qin Yining had good self-restraint. During Dian, she learned etiquette from the nannies in the palace. Therefore, no one could see the suffocation in her heart at this moment. Except for Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao didn't like the Yao clan's words. She said, Mother, don't worry. My father-in-law's family are all reasonable people. When I lost Sister Yi, my father-in-law didn't say anything. A few days ago, I almost died. It was my father-in-law and second uncle who gave up their positions to save me. If they blame me because of Sister Yi, why would they help me? Family Qin people are kind and honest. They won't do that. When the Yao clan heard that Pang Xiao almost died, they immediately became worried. What happened? Was it because you left the capital without permission? She frowned and couldn't help but glance at Qin Yining from the corner of her eyes. Her eyes were full of resentment. Qin Yining felt angry, wronged, and helpless when she looked at him. She felt suffocated and couldn't help but cover her mouth and retch. Oh, what's wrong with this child? Madame Ma was startled. She hurriedly pulled Qin Yining's hand and found that her palm was full of cold sweat. She asked worriedly, Come on, Bing Tang girl, come and check on your daughter. Yes. Bing Tang, Ji Yun, Xian Yun, and Lian Xiaozhou, who had been standing at the back, hurriedly ran over. They had been following Madame Dowager and the other two outside these days. Ji Yun and Xian Yun also taught Bing Tang and Lian Xiaozhou a lot of rules. They had just reunited with the main family, so it was not appropriate for them to go forward. Qin Yining's sight was blocked by Madame Ma and the others, so she didn't see them standing far away. At this time, when she saw Bing Tang and the others, Qin Yining resisted the urge to vomit, but she was still happy in her heart. She heard from Pang Xiao that they were still alive. Now that she saw them, she was completely relieved. Princess, how are you? Ji Yun held Qin Yining's hand. Madame Ma stepped aside and let Bing Tang treat Qin Yining. Bing Tang checked the pulse and made a sound of surprise. Then she smiled and said, Wang Fei, you are 3 months pregnant. You have already started to take medicine to nourish the fetus. Qin Yining nodded. She frowned and pursed her lips, but her eyes were full of joy. Bing Tang, Ji Yun, Xian Yun, and Lian Xiaozhou all laughed happily. The girl's laughter was sweet and pleasant. They congratulated her repeatedly, and the atmosphere became lively. Madame Ma's eyes widened in surprise, and then she clapped her hands and laughed. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes became deeper. Oh, that's great, that's great. Hey, why didn't you say so earlier? You just got pregnant and your body is weak. Why don't you lie down? Grandmother, I'm fine. Qin Yining smiled. She was very grateful for Madame Ma's care. Under the Yao clan's suspicion and Yao Qinggu's indifference, Madame Ma's sincerity was even more moving. Yao clan looked at Qin Yining with a frown, and then turned to look at Pang Xiao. There was no joy in their eyes, and their frown deepened. Pang Xiao saw the Yao clan's reaction and understood. She said, "We walked for more than 5 months on the way back. The road was desert and cold. Sister Yi was captured by the female Taiten Khan. She wanted to threaten De Zhou, and she was tortured. Her body has always been weak. It's my fault. I shouldn't have let her get pregnant at this time. Hey, look at me. Let's go back and rest first." As she spoke, she went to support Qin Yining. Although she didn't hug her, she used her large hand to squeeze Qin Yining's small hand. The warmth passed from her fingers to her heart. Qin Yining's heart was very moved. Madame Ma didn't care about these things. She only felt that the child's safe return was more important than anything else. Now that she was pregnant with Pang Xiao's child, it was even better. After hearing Pang Xiao's words, she nodded happily and worriedly. Okay. Dai Fu, quickly send your wife to rest. Give her supplements, ginseng, and cinnamon. We have plenty of money, so don't be stingy. Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. Don't worry. For your great-grandson, I will definitely not be stingy. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.